Welcome back, everyone. Hope you're settling in as we load into this beautiful Minecraft world in the background. Today's story is one that had me absolutely stunned. Imagine having your prize winning garden deliberately poisoned just because you wouldn't date someone's daughter. The entitlement is truly insane. As always, before we begin, thank you for watching my videos. We have now passed an additional 180 subscribers since the day that I started these videos. Seeing you guys commenting on my videos really keep me motivated and going. But now, grab a blanket, settle in, and let's judge some people together. Because you won't believe this story. It's almost comical how some people think they can force relationships through sabotage and intimidation. What universe does someone live in where destroying someone's passion project would make them more likely to join your family? It defies all logic, yet here we are, watching the drama unfold. As I keep working on my world tonight, I'll take you through this wild journey of garden warfare, neighborhood drama, and ultimately a revenge plot that blooms in unexpected ways. Our gardener thought they were just growing roses. They had no idea they were cultivating a perfect storm of suburban chaos. I've always been proud of my garden, not in a casual I water my plants sometimes way, but in a 3 consecutive Best Garden Awards from the Neighborhood Association kind of way. My roses were legendary, my vegetable patch was the envy of local chefs, and my hydrangeas, well, they made people stop their cars just to take pictures. Gardening wasn't just a hobby, it was my therapy, my passion, and honestly, a big part of my identity in our little suburban community. So when my prized roses started wilting mysteriously last spring, I was confused. I checked the soil pH, adjusted my watering schedule, even consulted with a local nursery expert. Nothing made sense. These were roses that had thrived for years under my care, suddenly looking like they'd been hit with a botanical plague. My dahlias followed suit a week later, then my prize-winning tomato plants. Something was seriously wrong. After 3 weeks of watching my garden deteriorate despite my best efforts, I installed a small security camera hidden in my bird feeder. Paranoid, maybe. But my gut told me this wasn't some random plant disease, and boy, was my gut right. The footage from the third night showed a figure sneaking into my garden at 2 a.m. Not some neighborhood teen or random vandal. It was Mrs. Jenkins, my 60-year-old neighbor from 3 houses down, methodically pouring something from an unmarked container onto my plant beds. The same Mrs. Jenkins who brought lemon squares to every community meeting. The same Mrs. Jenkins who organized the annual Christmas caroling. That Mrs. Jenkins was systematically murdering my garden under cover of darkness. Talk about seeing someone's true colors through night vision footage. Nothing quite says unhinged like a senior citizen conducting botanical warfare in fleece pajamas and garden clogs. I confronted her the next morning, showing her a still from the video on my phone. I expected denial, maybe tears, possibly a desperate explanation. Instead, she straightened her cardigan, looked me dead in the eyes, and said, "Well, perhaps if you'd been more gentlemanly toward Rebecca, your flowers wouldn't be suffering now." Rebecca, her 28-year-old daughter who had moved back home after graduate school. We'd spoken exactly twice, once when she asked about local coffee shops after moving back, and once at a neighborhood barbecue where she rather awkwardly suggested we grab dinner sometime, and I politely declined, explaining I had just gotten out of a long-term relationship and wasn't dating. Apparently, in Mrs. Jenkins' mind, this brief interaction constituted me leading Rebecca on, and then cruelly rejecting her. Even more bafflingly, Mrs. Jenkins informed me that she'd already told her book club, her church group, and several neighbors about what perfect grandchildren Rebecca and I would make together. She planned our entire relationship without either of us knowing. You know you've entered the twilight zone when someone destroys your property because you fail to fulfill a relationship fantasy they created entirely in their head. But that wasn't even the worst part. The following week, Mrs. Jenkins escalated her revenge campaign by circulating a petition titled Community Standards for Neighborly Conduct. While it never mentioned me by name, it was filled with not-so-subtle references to younger male residents who engage in manipulative dating practices and protection of community daughters from emotional predators. She got 17 signatures from neighbors who had no idea what they were really signing. My garden was dying, and now my reputation was wilting alongside it. Neighbors who used to stop and chat about fertilizer techniques were suddenly finding reasons to cross the street when they saw me coming. I was being ghosted by people I'd known for years, all because a woman couldn't handle the fact that I wasn't interested in her daughter. There's something deeply unsettling about watching a community you've been part of for years suddenly view you as some kind of villain, all based on a completely fabricated narrative. Then came the breaking point. After a particularly rough day of pulling dead plants from my once vibrant garden beds, I spotted movement on my security app around midnight. There was Mrs. Jenkins again, this time with a container clearly labeled Weed Killer, aimed directly at my award-winning hydrangeas, the last survivors of her previous attacks. I rushed outside in my pajamas and caught her red-handed, phone recording as evidence. The look on her face when my motion-activated floodlights revealed her midnight gardening session was almost worth all the damage she'd caused. Almost. My hydrangeas, Mrs. Jenkins? Really? Those took me 5 years to cultivate to this size. 5 years. She didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. Instead, she sniffed and said, "Rebecca cried for 3 days after you rejected her. My hydrangeas will grow back. Her confidence might not." I stood there in my yard, a 60-year-old plant assassin before me, and had to make a choice: call the police and press charges for trespassing, vandalism, and destruction of property, or find another way to resolve what had clearly evolved into complete neighborhood madness. If you've made it this far into the chaos, you're as addicted to Reddit drama as I am. Hit that subscribe button right now and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next with Mrs. Jenkins and her matchmaking scheme gone wrong. So there I was, faced with a decision that would define my place in this community moving forward. I could have Mrs. Jenkins arrested, which, let's be honest, would have been completely justified given the evidence I had. But I also knew that would permanently fracture the neighborhood and potentially make things even worse for me. Instead, I contacted a friend who worked at the local news station. I pitched a story about anonymous neighborhood gardening disputes that had gotten out of hand in our area. I provided my security footage with Mrs. Jenkins' face blurred, though her distinctive floral pajamas were still visible, and gave an interview about the emotional and financial impact of having award-winning gardens deliberately destroyed. The story ran the following week, complete with quotes from horticultural experts about the cowardice of nighttime plant vandalism and gardening as targeted harassment. It never mentioned names or our specific neighborhood, but the message couldn't have been clearer to anyone who knew the situation. The power of public shame is truly remarkable. Mrs. Jenkins showed up at my door 3 days after the news segment aired, ashen-faced and clutching a $200 gift card to the most expensive garden center in town. Her hands shook as she handed it over, along with a handwritten apology letter. Turns out several of her church friends had made comments about the terrible plant vandal on the news, not realizing they were talking to the culprit herself. Nothing says, "I've reconsidered my actions," quite like the fear of your bingo partners discovering you're secretly a botanical terrorist. The most surprising development came 2 days later when Rebecca knocked on my door. Unlike her mother, she was genuinely mortified. She explained that she had no idea what her mother had done, that she'd only mentioned our brief interaction in passing, and that her mother had spun an entire fictional romance in her head. Rebecca had been dating someone in a neighboring town the entire time and had never been particularly interested in me. My mother means well, but she's always been intense about wanting grandchildren, she explained, looking genuinely pained. I am so, so sorry. Over the following months, I rebuilt my garden. Some plants were lost forever, but many recovered with proper care. Rebecca and I actually developed a friendly relationship. She helped with some of the replanting as a gesture of goodwill, and we discovered we had similar taste in books and films. We occasionally grab coffee as friends, though we make sure to do so far from her mother's watchful eyes. As for Mrs. Jenkins, she now gives my house a wide berth. I did notice she's redirected her matchmaking energies toward the new single dad who moved in across the street. I anonymously left a small security camera on his porch with a note that simply read, "For your garden. Trust me." Sometimes the best revenge isn't escalation, it's making sure the next potential victim is forewarned. Speaking of unexpected revelations about people close to you, wait until you hear about the Redditor who discovered their best friend was actually family all along. Sarah and I had been inseparable since the first day of kindergarten, when we both showed up with the exact same rainbow lunchbox. It was like the universe pushed us together, and we just clicked in that way that sometimes happens with childhood friendships. We finished each other's sentences, had the same weird sense of humor, and even looked kind of similar. Both of us with wavy brown hair and hazel eyes, though Sarah was a few inches taller than me. Everyone always joked that we were more like sisters than friends. Teachers at school would mix us up despite us not really looking identical. My mum would accidentally call her by my name, and Sarah's dad would do the same with me. It became our running joke for over 25 years. Are you sure we weren't switched at birth? We'd laugh it off because obviously we had our own families who we clearly resembled. For my 30th birthday, we decided to do something that seemed fun and innocent at the time. We ordered those popular DNA testing kits. You know, the ones that tell you if you're 2% Scandinavian or if you're genetically predisposed to hate cilantro. It was just supposed to be a fun activity to do together, comparing our results and maybe discovering some interesting ancestry facts. Sarah even joked, "Watch us turn out to be distant cousins or something." If only we'd known how close to the truth that was. The kits arrived, we spit in the tubes, mailed them off, and then mostly forgot about them as life got busy. I was dealing with a promotion at work, and Sarah was in the middle of planning her wedding to her longtime boyfriend, James. The DNA results weren't exactly high on our priority list anymore. About 6 weeks later, I got an email notification that my results were ready. I didn't even open them immediately, figuring I'd wait until Sarah got hers so we could look at them together. But then another notification popped up, one I wasn't expecting. "You have a close family match in our database." I clicked on it, assuming it was probably a cousin I already knew about. The match said 25% DNA shared, predicted relationship, half sibling, and the name next to it, Sarah Williams. My Sarah, my best friend. I sat there staring at my screen for what felt like hours, the world tilting around me. This had to be a mistake. These consumer DNA tests weren't supposed to be that accurate, right? Maybe their algorithm was wrong, but a 25% match was pretty specific. Too specific to ignore. Before I could even process what I was looking at, my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Did you see this? Call me right now." When people talk about life-changing moments, they often describe them as dramatic movie scenes. But real life isn't like that. Real life is sitting in your pajamas at your kitchen table on a Tuesday morning, trying to breathe normally while your entire understanding of your life and relationships collapses around you. The call with Sarah was chaotic, both of us talking over each other, asking questions neither of us had answers to. Were we actually related? How was this possible? Was the test wrong? What did this mean? We agreed to meet in person that evening to figure out our next steps. I spent the day in a fog, barely able to focus on work. By the time I got home, I'd convinced myself there must be some logical explanation. Maybe our samples got mixed up at the lab. Maybe the test wasn't reliable. Maybe it was all just a bizarre coincidence. But deep down, I knew. Somehow, I knew it was true. When I saw Sarah that night, we hugged longer than usual, both of us shaking slightly. We decided we needed to confront our parents, separately at first, to see what each family had to say. I approached my parents the next day. My dad had always been a jovial, open person, the kind of father who talked freely about everything from politics to his own embarrassing teenage stories. My mother was more reserved but loving and honest. I trusted them both implicitly, or at least I thought I did. I showed them the test results without any preamble, watching their reactions carefully. The color drained from both their faces, but it was my father's expression that confirmed everything before he even spoke. He looked like a man who'd been dreading this moment for 30 years. "I think you need to explain this," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. My father glanced at my mother, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Then he took a deep breath. "Before you and Sarah were born, before your mother and I were even married, I had a brief relationship with Sarah's mother, Diane." The words hung in the air like smoke, choking me. My father continued, explaining that it had been a matter of weeks, a mistake made when he and my mother had briefly broken up during their engagement. By the time he and my mother reconciled, he'd already ended things with Diane, never knowing she was pregnant. "When did you find out?" I asked. "We didn't," my mother said quietly. "Not until you and Sarah became friends in kindergarten and we met Diane at your school. We recognized each other immediately." This is the kind of twist that makes you question everything you thought you knew. The adults in our lives have been carrying this secret for decades, watching us grow up as best friends, never saying a word. My mother explained that they'd met Diane and her husband Richard at a parent orientation, and the recognition was instant. There had been a tense, private conversation between the four adults, where Diane confirmed my father was Sarah's biological father, not Richard. But Richard had raised Sarah as his own from birth, never knowing differently, and Diane didn't want to destroy her marriage. "So you all just decided to say nothing for 30 years? I couldn't keep the anger from my voice. "We thought it was for the best," my father said, looking miserable. "You two found each other anyway, formed your own bond. We didn't want to complicate that with adult problems." The absurdity of it all hit me like a truck. Our mothers had even joined the same new mothers group when we were infants, becoming friends themselves, all while carrying this massive secret. They'd watched us grow up as inseparable best friends, all while knowing we were actually half-sisters. Every birthday party, every sleepover, every milestone, they'd been there smiling and taking pictures, never saying a word. Talk about an award-winning performance from the parental ensemble cast. They deserve Oscars for best deception maintained over 3 decades. But that wasn't even the worst part. When Sarah confronted her parents, her world imploded even more violently than mine. While I'd at least grown up with my biological parents, she discovered that the man she'd called Dad her entire life wasn't her biological father. Richard, who taught her to ride a bike, walked her down the aisle at her wedding, and given her away to James just 6 months earlier, had no idea he wasn't her biological father. The revelation tore through both families like a hurricane. Richard was devastated, feeling betrayed by decades of lies from his wife. He moved out temporarily, needing space to process everything. My parents' marriage became strained under the weight of old secrets brought to light. And in the middle of it all, Sarah and I, who should have been able to rely on each other, fell apart. Sarah stopped speaking to me entirely. She cancelled our weekly coffee dates, ignored my texts, and blocked me on social media. When I finally cornered her after nearly a month of silence, she exploded. If you hadn't insisted on those stupid DNA tests, everyone would be happy, she screamed, tears streaming down her face. My dad wouldn't have moved out, my mum wouldn't be having panic attacks, and I wouldn't have to question everything I've ever known about my family. This is your fault. It wasn't rational, but grief and shock rarely are. She needed someone to blame, and I was the easiest target. So I gave her space, even though it felt like losing a limb. Sarah wasn't just my best friend, she was my sister, literally my blood. And now I'd found her only to lose her. The silence between us stretched to 3 agonizing months. 3 months of family therapy with my parents, of watching my mother cry over old wounds, reopened, of seeing my father struggle with guilt for a decades-old mistake. 3 months of hearing through mutual friends that Sarah's parents were in counseling, that Richard had moved back home, but things were still tense. 3 months of feeling like I'd inadvertently detonated a bomb in multiple lives. Family secrets are funny things. They don't just disappear when buried. They grow roots, spreading silently underground until they break through the surface with enough force to shatter everything you thought was solid. Then one day, my phone lit up with a text from Sarah. Coffee tomorrow, our usual place. 10 a.m. Just seeing her name on my screen made me cry with relief. I arrived at the cafe 20 minutes early, nervously rehearsing what I'd say. When Sarah walked in, we both just stared at each other for a long moment before simultaneously bursting into tears and embracing in the middle of the coffee shop, drawing curious stares from other customers. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I needed someone to blame, and you were there." We talked for hours. She told me how therapy had helped her realize that her anger was misplaced, that the adults in our lives had made choices long before we were born, choices we couldn't change. She admitted something that hit me right in the heart, that despite the pain and chaos, she'd always felt a connection to me that went beyond normal friendship. "Remember how we could always tell what the other was thinking," she said, smiling through tears. "How we'd get sick at the same time, crave the same foods. Maybe it wasn't just best friend telepathy after all." We decided that day that while our parents had made mistakes, the universe had found a way to bring us together anyway. What were the odds that two half-sisters would become best friends from kindergarten without knowing their connection? It felt like fate, like some cosmic force ensuring we'd be in each other's lives regardless. Today, nearly 2 years later, our families have slowly healed. Richard eventually came to terms with the fact that biology doesn't define fatherhood. The decades he spent raising and loving Sarah do. My parents have worked through their issues in therapy, their marriage ultimately stronger for having faced the past together. And Sarah and I, we're closer than ever, embracing our sisterhood openly. We celebrate 2 birthdays each now, our actual birthdays and what we call Sister Day, the anniversary of the day we discovered we truly were family. It turns out that DNA doesn't just tell you about your past. Sometimes it reshapes your future in ways you never could have imagined. Family secrets can either destroy relationships or strengthen them. But imagine if the person you trusted with your deepest secrets was the one exploiting them all along. I never thought I'd need therapy. I was always the strong one in my friend group, the person others came to for advice. But after my 5-year relationship with Alex ended, I wasn't just heartbroken. I was shattered in ways I couldn't explain to anyone. It wasn't just a breakup, it was psychological warfare. See, Alex hadn't just cheated. They'd created elaborate lies, gaslighted me about events I knew happened, and even turned mutual friends against me with stories that painted me as unstable and paranoid. By the time it was over, I was questioning my own memory and sanity. My friends suggested therapy, specifically for what they called relationship PTSD, which sounded dramatic but honestly felt accurate. That's how I found Dr. Eliza Morgan. With her soft-spoken demeanor, tastefully minimalist office, and wall full of impressive credentials, She seemed perfect. She specialized in trauma from manipulative relationships and came highly recommended by a friend of a friend. During our first session, she spent nearly 20 minutes explaining confidentiality, how everything I shared was protected, how she took privacy seriously, how her office was a safe space for healing. I believed her completely. For 6 months, I bared my soul in that office. I told Dr. Morgan things I'd never told anyone about the night I found messages on Alex's phone, about the friend who admitted they'd been sleeping together for a year, about how Alex had laughed when I confronted them. I cried describing how I'd started recording conversations just to prove to myself I wasn't imagining things. I admitted to dark thoughts, to moments of wanting revenge, to embarrassing behaviors I'm not proud of. Dr. Morgan nodded compassionately through it all, occasionally offering insights about narcissistic abuse patterns or trauma responses. She seemed genuinely invested in my healing. I trusted her completely, which makes what happened next so much worse. The revelation came from the most mundane source imaginable: break room small talk. My coworker Jade was gushing about her favorite podcast during lunch. "You've got to listen to Broken Hearts, Broken Minds," she insisted, scrolling through her phone. "It's this therapist who analyzes these insane relationship stories. Last week's episode was about this woman whose boyfriend gaslit her so badly, she started secretly recording their conversations just to make sure she wasn't going crazy." My sandwich stopped halfway to my mouth. That detail about recording conversations wasn't something I'd told many people. "What else happened in that episode?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "Oh, it was wild," Jade continued, oblivious to my growing horror. The boyfriend was cheating with her friend for like a year, and when she confronted him, he literally laughed in her face, ice cold. The therapist breaks down how that kind of betrayal creates trust issues that can last for years. Each detail she mentioned matched my story exactly. My hands started shaking so badly, I had to put my sandwich down. "What's this podcast called again?" I asked. "Broken Hearts, Broken Minds. The host is anonymous, just goes by Dr. M, but you can tell she's legit. She analyzes everything so professionally. Dr. M, Dr. Morgan. It couldn't be coincidence. I listened to the podcast on my drive home, and it felt like being violated all over again. The story was mine, with names changed and a few insignificant details altered, but unmistakably mine. The patient's voice was obviously disguised, but between these segments, Dr. M would analyze the psychological dynamics at play. And even though she was clearly trying to modify her speaking style, I recognized Dr. Morgan's distinctive cadence, her habit of pausing before making key points, even some of her pet phrases like emotional fingerprints and trauma echoes. My private pain, my most vulnerable moments, had been packaged into entertainment and distributed to thousands of listeners. Complete strangers were commenting on the episode, judging my reactions, even making jokes about certain parts. One commenter wrote, "I lost it when she described hiding in the closet to catch him. Girl was straight up Glenn Close in Fatal Attraction." I had actually hidden in Alex's walk-in closet once, something I'd been deeply ashamed to admit even to Dr. Morgan. You know that feeling when you realize you're naked in a room you thought was empty? This was like discovering the room had been full of people with cameras the entire time. I spent the night alternating between sobbing and rage listening to other episodes. Each one was clearly about one of Dr. Morgan's patients. I recognized stories from the waiting room. The businessman who always looked exhausted, episode titled Corporate Crumbling. The college girl with blue hair who often looked like she'd been crying, episode titled Campus Catastrophe. Dr. Morgan had turned her entire practice into content for her podcast. And here's where it gets truly maddening. The podcast had sponsors. She was literally profiting from our trauma. There were ad breaks where she personally recommended therapy apps and weighted blankets for anxiety as a mental health professional. She had monetized our most painful experiences and was using them to build her brand. The latest episode, my episode, had over 200,000 downloads. The sheer calculated betrayal of it left me breathless. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment or a one-time ethical slip. This was months, possibly years, of systematic exploitation of vulnerable people who had trusted her with their deepest wounds. The next morning, I cancelled a meeting and went directly to Dr. Morgan's office. Her receptionist tried to stop me, saying she was with a patient, but I pushed past her. I couldn't help but wonder if that patient's session would be next week's episode. Dr. Morgan looked up from her notepad, irritation quickly replaced by surprise when she saw me without an appointment. "What is broken hearts, broken minds?" I asked without preamble. Her expression shifted so subtly most people would miss it, but I'd spent 6 months studying her face across that coffee table. It was the micro-expression of someone whose secret has just been discovered. "I think we should discuss this privately," she said calmly, glancing at the confused patient in the chair across from her. "Absolutely," I replied, "and you should know I'm recording this conversation, just like you recorded ours." The patient's head snapped toward Dr. Morgan, who maintained her professional composure as she escorted them out with promises to reschedule. Once we were alone, her demeanor changed completely. "You're overreacting," she said, her voice cooler than I'd ever heard it. "I create anonymized case studies for educational purposes. It's completely legal and within ethical guidelines." "Educational?" I nearly shouted. "You're running ads for CBD gummies in the middle of my trauma. You've got merch with your podcast logo. There's nothing educational about this. It's exploitation." "Everything is properly anonymized," she insisted. "No real names are used and details are changed to protect privacy." "You mentioned the butterfly tattoo on my wrist," I countered. "You described the exact message I found on Alex's phone, word for word. Anyone who knows me would recognize this story instantly." "That's your perception," she said dismissively. "I assure you I'm well within my legal rights. Perhaps we should schedule a proper session to discuss why you're having such an extreme reaction to this." The audacity was almost impressive. Here she was, caught red-handed, trying to therapize her way out of her own ethical violation. She wasn't just breaking confidentiality, she was gaslighting me about it, using the exact tactics she'd helped me identify in my relationship with Alex. That's when I knew this wasn't a misunderstanding or a gray ethical area. This was predatory behavior from someone who absolutely knew better. "Our professional relationship is terminated," I said, surprised by how steady my voice was. "You'll be hearing from the licensing board." "That would be a mistake," she replied, her tone suddenly icy. "It would just be your word against mine, and I have an impeccable professional record. Think carefully before making accusations you can't prove." She clearly thought she had covered her tracks well enough. She didn't realize I'd already downloaded every episode of her podcast, taken screenshots of her Patreon page, where she offered deeper analysis of patient situations to premium subscribers, and recorded our current conversation. The next few weeks were a blur of paperwork, meetings, and anxiety. I filed a formal complaint with the state licensing board for psychologists, providing the podcast episodes as evidence. I contacted a lawyer who specialized in privacy violations and medical malpractice. The investigation moved slowly at first until something unexpected happened. Other patients started coming forward. A local news outlet picked up the story, keeping my name anonymous but detailing the allegations against Dr. Morgan. Within days, 5 other patients had contacted the licensing board with similar experiences. One had even confronted her months earlier, only to be threatened with a defamation lawsuit if they went public. Each person recognized their own story from different podcast episodes. Turns out Dr. Morgan had seriously miscalculated her ability to intimidate people who had specifically sought therapy to stop letting themselves be intimidated by manipulative people. The irony would be delicious if the whole situation weren't so disturbing. The licensing board's investigation was thorough and damning. They discovered recording equipment hidden in Dr. Morgan's office decor. A clock, a tissue box holder, even the small fountain that provided white noise for privacy actually contained a high-quality microphone. Her initial defense that she was creating composite characters fell apart when investigators found her raw audio files, clearly labeled with patient initials and dates. Dr. Morgan's license was suspended pending further investigation, which effectively ended her practice. The podcast was removed from all platforms after multiple complaints. She's now facing several lawsuits, including mine, and potential criminal charges for recording without consent, which is illegal in our state. As for me, I eventually found a new therapist, after extensively researching their background and reading every review I could find. Dr. Patel begins each session by explicitly confirming confidentiality and has a strict no recording devices policy that applies to both of us. The first few sessions were hard. I was hypervigilant, constantly scanning for signs I was being recorded or manipulated. But slowly, I'm learning to trust the process again, if not the person. The most important lesson from this nightmare wasn't about Dr. Morgan's betrayal, but about my own resilience. The same strength that helped me survive Alex's gaslighting enabled me to stand up to Dr. Morgan's exploitation. In a strange way, she proved her therapeutic methods worked, just not in the way she intended. Being trapped by someone's betrayal is devastating, but at least I could walk away from my therapist. Imagine being literally imprisoned by someone who's supposed to care about you. My marriage to Elena wasn't perfect, but whose is? We'd been going through a rough patch for about 6 months. Communication issues mostly, some disagreements about finances, the usual stuff, but we were working on it. Couples therapy twice a month, date nights every Wednesday, the whole 9 yards. It wasn't easy, but we were committed to figuring it out. Or at least, I thought we both were. Elena's father, Victor, had never particularly liked me. He was old-school Russian, built like a brick wall with hands like baseball gloves and a permanent scowl etched into his face. From day one, he made it clear I wasn't good enough for his daughter. She has MBA from Princeton, he would say, his accent thickening when he was emotional. You have what? Art degree? Never mind that my art degree had landed me a solid job as a creative director at a marketing firm that paid quite well. In Victor's eyes, I would always be the starving artist who'd somehow tricked his brilliant daughter into marriage. When Elena left for a week-long business trip to Chicago, I was surprised to get a text from Victor inviting me over to his house. We should talk, man to man, the message read. Maybe time to understand each other better. I showed the message to my therapist, who thought it was a positive development. Family reconciliation could really help your marriage, she said encouragingly. So despite my reservations, I agreed to meet him that Saturday afternoon. Victor lived in a sprawling ranch-style home that he'd largely built himself. He greeted me at the door with a firm handshake and what passed for a smile on his stony face. The house smelled like the beef stew Elena sometimes made, and for a moment I felt a pang of optimism. Maybe he really did want to mend fences. Come, he said after some awkward small talk over coffee. Want to show you my new workshop, just finished last month. I followed him down the stairs to his basement, genuinely curious. Victor was a skilled woodworker, and despite our differences, I'd always admired his craftsmanship. The basement was meticulously organized with gleaming tools arranged on pegboards and several impressive half-finished furniture pieces scattered around. Through here, Victor said, gesturing toward a heavy door in the back corner, special room for detailed work. The moment I stepped through that door, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. The room was small, maybe 10 by 12 feet, with no windows. Inside was a twin bed, a small desk, a mini fridge, and a bathroom set up with a curtain for privacy. It looked like a prison cell that someone had half-heartedly decorated to resemble a bedroom. Before I could react, Victor slammed the door behind me. I heard multiple locks click into place. "What the hell, Victor?" I shouted, pounding on the door. "Open this right now. We will talk through door," he said calmly from the other side. "On desk you find papers, divorce papers. You sign, I let you go." My blood ran cold as I turned to look at the desk. Sure enough, there was a manila folder with legal documents inside. Divorce papers already filled out with my information and Elena's. The terms were absurd. I would relinquish all claims to any shared property, take on our minimal debt, and explicitly waive any rights to Elena's inheritance from her recently deceased grandmother, which was substantial. "This is insane," I called through the door. "Elena and I are working through our issues. She doesn't want a divorce." "Elena doesn't know what she wants," Victor replied matter-of-factly. "You have turned her head with your artist charm, but father knows what is best. You sign papers, I let you go. Simple." "People will notice I'm missing," I argued. "I have work on Monday, friends expecting to hear from me." Through the door, I heard what could only be described as a smug chuckle. "Already handled. Sent text from your phone to Elena. Said you need space to think about marriage. Told your work you have family emergency. No one will look for you for days." He'd thought of everything. He had my phone. No one would miss me until at least Monday, maybe later. The door looked solid, some kind of reinforced metal with multiple locks. There was no way I was breaking it down. The sheer premeditation is what gets me. This wasn't a heat-of-the-moment kidnapping. Victor had built an entire holding cell in his basement, specifically for this purpose. Who does that? Does Lowe's have a kidnap your son-in-law section I'm not aware of? I spent that first night alternating between rage, panic, and desperate attempts to find a way out. The room was disturbingly well equipped for a longer stay. The mini fridge was stocked with water bottles, sandwich materials, and fruit. The bathroom setup, though basic, was functional, with actual plumbing connected to a toilet and sink. There were even books on the nightstand, all in Russian naturally. By morning, I had calmed down enough to think strategically. I needed to find a weakness in Victor's plan. I started by methodically examining every inch of the room. That's when I noticed the cameras, small, discreet ones mounted in the corners near the ceiling. He was watching me. The knowledge made my skin crawl, but it was also information I could potentially use. As I continued my inspection, I realized something crucial. The water heater for the main house was in this room, tucked into a corner behind a half wall, and there appeared to be a small blind spot between the water heater and the wall that the cameras couldn't quite capture. Victor brought food 3 times that day, opening the door just enough to slide in a tray, always with the divorce papers on top. "Sign papers, go home," he'd say each time, as if he were being completely reasonable. I pretended to be considering it, asking questions about specific terms, telling him I needed time to think. In reality, I was buying time while formulating a plan. When I was certain he wasn't watching, I began carefully examining the water heater and surrounding pipes. I had limited tools, just plastic cutlery from my meals, but the pipes looked old. With enough time and pressure in the right spots, I might be able to create a leak. It was risky. The water heater could be dangerous if tampered with improperly, but my alternatives were signing away everything in an illegal divorce or waiting for someone to eventually realize something was wrong. For the next 3 days, I maintained a careful routine. I'd read, pace, and appeared to be contemplating the divorce papers when I knew Victor was watching. But whenever I used the bathroom or pretended to nap, I'd work on the pipes in the blind spot, gradually weakening key connections with nothing but plastic spoons and brute force. By day 4, Victor was getting impatient. "You think too much," he said through the door that morning. "Today you sign, or conditions get worse. No more books. no more light at night. That was when I knew I needed to act. While he was upstairs, I gave one final, desperate twist to the pipe I'd been working on. For a terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then, with a groan of metal, the pipe burst. Water began gushing out with surprising force, immediately flooding the floor and spraying toward the electrical outlets. I started shouting, "Victor, water pipe broke. The room is flooding. The outlets are getting wet." I heard him running down the stairs, cursing in Russian. When he opened the door and saw the rapidly flooding room, his eyes went wide. He rushed in to try to stop the water, exactly as I'd hoped. The moment he was fully inside, I bolted past him through the open door, slammed it shut, and locked every single bolt from the outside. Now he was the prisoner. "You let me out right now," he bellowed, pounding on the door. "Not a chance," I replied, catching my breath. "Enjoy your stay. I designed it specially for you." I found my phone on his kitchen counter and immediately called the police. Then I took photos of the cell, the divorce papers, and sent everything to my own email as evidence. By the time the police arrived, water was seeping under the basement door into the hallway. Victor's muffled shouting could be heard all the way upstairs. The officers were, understandably, confused by the situation at first, but the evidence was overwhelming. The holding cell, the divorce papers, my documented injuries from trying to escape. They arrested Victor on the spot for kidnapping and extortion. Elena returned from her trip to absolute chaos. She was horrified by what her father had done, insisting she had no knowledge of his plan. I believed her. The shock and disgust on her face seemed genuine, but something had broken between us that couldn't be fixed. The trust was gone, not because I thought she was involved, but because I realized how deeply her father could influence our lives. We did eventually get divorced, but on our own terms. We sold our house, split the assets fairly, and both kept our rights to future inheritances. It was amicable, all things considered. Victor, meanwhile, is serving 8 years for kidnapping, extortion, and false imprisonment. Elena visits him occasionally. I don't. The experience taught me to trust my instincts about people, and that some family ties are more like chains than connections. It also taught me a surprising amount about plumbing, which came in handy when I bought my own place. Silver linings, I guess. Speaking of ruined relationships, nothing quite compares to having your special day completely destroyed in front of everyone you know. They say your wedding day is supposed to be the happiest day of your life. For me, it was, right up until it became the absolute worst. Mike and I had been together for 4 years before he proposed. We'd met in college, survived the post-graduation job hunt together, and moved to a new city where we didn't know anyone. Our relationship had been my constant through all of life's changes, and I was certain we were meant to be together forever. Our wedding planning took over a year. I'm not normally the type to obsess over details, but something about planning this day brought out my inner perfectionist. The venue was a restored historic mansion with gardens that looked magical in spring. My dress was custom made by a designer I'd splurged on because, as my mum put it, if not now, when? We'd selected every song, every flower, every menu item with care. And most importantly, I'd asked my cousin Jen to be my maid of honor. Jen and I had been inseparable since we were kids. Our mothers are sisters, and we'd grown up more like siblings than cousins. She'd been there through every major moment of my life. My parents' divorce, my first heartbreak, my college graduation. When I got engaged, there was never any question who would stand beside me on the big day. She seemed genuinely happy for me, throwing me the most thoughtful bridal shower and helping with all the tedious wedding tasks without complaining once. The ceremony was everything I'd dreamed of. Mike teared up when I walked down the aisle, which made me cry too. We exchanged the vows we'd written ourselves, and there wasn't a dry eye in the house. After the ceremony, we took photos in the garden while guests enjoyed cocktail hour. Everything was running smoothly, exactly according to plan. The reception began with dinner, and then it was time for toasts. My father went first, giving a sweet speech about watching me grow up. Mike's best man followed with some appropriately censored college stories that made everyone laugh. Then Jen stood up, champagne glass in hand, and walked to the microphone. I remember feeling so full of love in that moment, watching my new husband hold my hand across the table while my best friend prepared to toast to our happiness. I had no idea my entire world was about to collapse. Jen tapped the microphone twice and smiled. Not her usual warm smile, but something different. A smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I've known Rachel since we were in diapers," she began, "and I've been there for every important moment of her life, so it seems fitting that I'm here on her wedding day too." She paused, her eyes scanning the room. "But I'm afraid I can't just give the speech I had planned." My stomach dropped. Something was wrong. Mike squeezed my hand reassuringly, but I could see confusion on his face too. "You see," Jen continued, her voice steady, "I'm actually here with an announcement of my own." She placed a free hand on her stomach. "I'm 3 months pregnant, and Mike is the father." The room went completely silent. I'm talking pin drop, time standing still, silent. I looked at Mike, expecting him to jump up, to deny it, to tell everyone it was a sick joke. Instead, all the color drained from his face, and that's when I knew it was true. The silence shattered as my mother screamed, "What?" And Mike's father stood up so quickly he knocked over his chair. Within seconds, the room erupted into chaos. People were shouting, crying, moving toward us or away from us. Someone tried to grab the microphone from Jen, but she held on. "We've been seeing each other for months," she continued, raising her voice above the commotion. "It started at New Year's when Rachel was visiting her dad. I'm sorry it happened this way, but I thought everyone should know the truth before this marriage goes any further." I felt like I was floating outside my body, watching this nightmare happen to someone else. This couldn't be real. My husband of 3 hours and my best friend since childhood. The two people I trusted most in the world. The room is spinning, but it's like I'm frozen in place. Ever had one of those dreams where you need to run, but your legs won't move? That's exactly what this felt like, except I wasn't going to wake up from this nightmare. Mike finally spoke, his voice barely audible. "Rachel, I'm so sorry. It was just supposed to be a one-time thing during the bachelor party weekend. I was drunk, and it didn't mean anything." Just when I thought it couldn't get worse, Jen pulled out her phone. "A one-time thing? Really, Mike? Should I read these texts out loud too?" She scrolled through her phone. "How about this one from 2 weeks ago? Can't wait to see you tomorrow while Rachel's at her final dress fitting." Or this gem from last month. I've never felt this way about anyone before. The bachelor party. While I was at home, excitedly putting together welcome bags for our out-of-town guests, my fiancé was sleeping with my cousin. And apparently, that was just one encounter in a months-long affair. You know those movie scenes where someone's heart is literally breaking? That's exactly what it felt like. Physical pain radiating through my chest, making it hard to breathe. My $30,000 dream wedding had instantly transformed into a public humiliation spectacle that would give reality TV producers a run for their money. That's when I noticed my wedding photographer dutifully capturing the moment. Click, 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 documenting my devastation for posterity, because apparently this day needed to be preserved in high definition, professionally lit detail. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. The room gradually quieted as people noticed me moving. I took off my veil and placed it carefully on the table. Then I looked directly at Mike. "We're done," I said simply. No dramatics, no screaming, just a flat statement of fact. I turned to leave but paused next to Jen. "I hope it was worth it," I whispered. Then I walked out of my own wedding reception, still in my custom-made gown, as whispers and gasps followed me out. My sister ran after me, helped me change into regular clothes, and drove me to our parents' house. The next few days are still a blur in my memory. I remember my mum fielding calls from concerned guests and family members. I remember my dad offering to have a talk with Mike, his expression making it clear what kind of talk he meant. I remember staring at the ceiling all night, unable to sleep, replaying every moment of my relationship and friendship, looking for signs I'd missed. Within a week, I'd filed for annulment on grounds of fraud. Turns out starting your marriage with a secret affair and pregnancy is actually legitimate grounds for legally erasing the whole thing. I cancelled the joint bank account we'd set up, returned what gifts I could, and moved out of our apartment while Mike was at work. And then I did something either very brave or very petty, depending on who you ask. I took our honeymoon, alone. The tickets to Bali were non-refundable, and I decided that after what I'd been through, I deserved that 2-week stay in paradise. I posted exactly one photo on social media, me on a beautiful beach with the caption, "Starting my new life solo." The post got more sympathy likes than anything I've ever shared before or since. Coming home was hard. My family had split into factions, those who thought I should try to forgive Mike and Jen for the baby's sake, and those who were firmly on Team Rachel. Thanksgiving was going to be a nightmare, so I decided to skip it entirely. I found a job in another state, packed up whatever didn't remind me of my previous life, and moved away. Therapy helped. So did distance. I slowly started rebuilding, making new friends, dating casually, finding my footing. I was actually doing pretty well, all things considered. Then, 6 months after the wedding, I received an email from Mike with an attachment, a paternity test result. Mike wasn't the father of Jen's baby. In fact, according to his email, Jen had admitted she was already pregnant before she ever slept with him, by a guy she'd met on a dating app. She'd orchestrated the entire scene at our wedding for revenge, because I'd been chosen as maid of honor for our other cousin's wedding instead of her. The levels of calculation and cruelty it would take to plan something like that are beyond my comprehension. She destroyed 3 lives, mine, Mike's, and ultimately her own, since both sides of the family have mostly cut contact with her, over something as trivial as wedding party jealousy. Mike's email ended with a plea for reconciliation, saying we could start fresh now that the truth was out. I never responded. Some betrayals cut too deep to heal, and some trust, once broken, can never be repaired. I don't hate them anymore, but I don't have space in my new life for either of them. The whole experience taught me that sometimes the happy ending isn't riding off into the sunset with your prince. Sometimes it's walking away with your dignity and finding happiness on your own terms. That, and always have a prenup, no matter how sure you are. Trust is fragile, and once broken, it's nearly impossible to restore, especially when someone's betrayal puts your entire identity at risk. I thought I'd hit the roommate jackpot with Casey. She was clean, quiet during my work hours, and most importantly, always paid her rent on time. In the cutthroat apartment market of Boston, that practically made her a unicorn. Sure, there were a few quirks, late-night visitors who never stayed long, hushed phone conversations that would abruptly end when I walked into the room, the occasional unexplained absence for days at a time. But honestly, who doesn't have a few oddities? We weren't best friends, but we had a comfortable arrangement that worked for both of us. At least that's what I thought until the day my mortgage application was denied. I'd been saving for years to buy my first home, a modest 2-bedroom condo in a neighborhood that wouldn't require selling an organ to afford. My finances were in perfect order. I had a solid down payment, stable income from my job as a software developer, and most importantly, an excellent credit score of 780 that I'd built meticulously since college. The pre-approval had gone smoothly, so when the mortgage broker called with a tremor in her voice, I was confused. "There seems to be a problem with your credit," she said hesitantly. "That's impossible," I laughed. "I check my score regularly. It was 780 last month." "It's 430 now," she replied. And there are multiple collection accounts. Did you recently open 6 credit cards and max them all out? The floor seemed to drop from under me. 6 credit cards, collections, my perfect credit score in free fall. None of this made sense. I thanked her, hung up, and immediately pulled my credit report. What I saw made me physically ill. 6 credit cards opened in my name within the past 3 weeks, all maxed out, totaling over $45,000 in charges, 2 personal loans, a car lease, and somehow multiple missed payments already being reported, tanking my score. But the true gut punch came when I checked my bank accounts and discovered they'd been systematically drained. My checking account was overdrawn, and my savings account, which had held my down payment, was empty except for 42 and 17. 15 years of careful financial planning destroyed in less than a month. The violation felt physical, like someone had reached into my chest and squeezed my lungs. I was still staring at my laptop in shock when Casey came home. She took one look at my face and froze in the doorway, keys dangling from her fingers. "What's wrong?" she asked, but something in her expression, a flicker of panic, a tightness around her eyes, told me she already knew. I turned my laptop screen toward her, showing the credit report. Someone stole my identity, opened credit cards, drained my accounts, everything. Over $45,000 gone. For a second, I thought she might run. Her eyes darted to the door, her body tensed like a sprinter at the starting block. But then her shoulders slumped and she sank into the chair across from me. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I didn't think it would go this far." The confirmation hit me like a physical blow. Casey, my roommate, the person who slept 20 feet away from me every night, she had done this. "You did this?" I managed to ask, though I already knew the answer. "Why? How? I trusted you." And here's where the story moves from merely terrible to truly nightmarish. Casey, through tears and fragmented sentences, revealed that she had a gambling problem. What had started as casual poker nights had escalated to online betting, casino trips, and eventually high-interest loans from the kind of people who don't exactly work for banks. She'd racked up about $10,000 in debt to a bookie named Vince, who had started making threats. He said he'd break my legs, or worse, Casey explained, mascara streaking down her face. Then he offered a way out. He said if I could get him someone's identity, complete identity, not just a credit card number, he'd clear my debt entirely. That's when it clicked. The hushed phone calls, the strange visitors, her convenient insistence on collecting the mail most days. She'd photographed my driver's license, social security card, birth certificate, everything from the file box I kept in my desk. She'd even taken pictures of my passport, just to be thorough. "I thought you could just report it as fraud," she said, as if that made it better. "The credit card companies would fix it, and the banks would give your money back. I didn't think they'd take everything." The casualness with which she destroyed my financial life because she thought it could be easily fixed with a phone call left me speechless. It's like setting someone's house on fire because you assume insurance will cover it. The staggering entitlement is almost more shocking than the act itself. But that wasn't even the most disturbing revelation. Casey admitted she'd been sleeping with my spare apartment key under her pillow for weeks. Terrified I'd discover what she'd done before Vince could process everything, she'd been prepared to prevent me from entering my own home if necessary. "Prevent me how exactly?" I asked, suddenly afraid of the woman I'd been living with for 18 months. She couldn't meet my eyes. "Vince gave me something, just in case. I never would have used it though, I swear." The implication that my roommate had some kind of weapon intended to stop me from discovering her betrayal was the final straw. I walked to the kitchen, picked up my phone with shaking hands, and called the police. The next few weeks were a blur of police reports, identity theft claims, and endless hours on hold with banks and credit card companies. Casey was arrested that night, and through her cooperation, the police were able to arrest Vince and several members of his operation. It turned out I wasn't their only victim. They had been running an identity theft ring, targeting roommates, college students, and elderly people for years. Despite Casey's full cooperation, the legal consequences were significant. She received 3 years of probation and was ordered to pay full restitution for all the financial damages. Vince and his associates faced much heavier charges, including organized crime and grand theft. As for me, the fallout was devastating. It took 18 months to fully clear my credit and recover what funds could be recovered, which wasn't everything. I lost the opportunity to buy my dream home. By the time my credit was restored, housing prices had risen beyond my reach. At 32 years old, I had to move back in with my parents for a year while rebuilding my finances from scratch. Every job application, apartment rental, even some date options were complicated by having to explain why my credit had a fraud alert attached to it. The experience fundamentally changed how I interact with the world. I check my credit monthly now. I keep important documents in a fireproof safe with a combination lock. I installed a deadbolt on my bedroom door at my new apartment, where I live alone despite the financial strain, because I can't bear the thought of trusting a roommate again. Casey, to her credit, no pun intended, has been making payments as ordered by the court. $50 a month, every month, without fail. At that rate, assuming she never misses a payment, she'll have repaid me in full in approximately 74 more years. I'll be 107. Sometimes I imagine being a centenarian, still receiving those small checks from a grey-haired Casey, both of us bound together by this financial umbilical cord, until death. The saddest part, she really did think it would be a victimless crime. That identity theft was just paperwork that could be easily undone. She never considered the human cost, the stress, the lost opportunities, the shattered trust, the feeling of violation that lingers years later. I still occasionally wake up in a cold sweat, checking my phone to make sure no new accounts have been opened in my name. Identity theft changes how you view trust completely. But imagine if the theft came from someone who shares your DNA and your face. Having an identical twin sister is like having a built-in best friend, a mirror that talks back, and your own personal doppelganger all rolled into one. At least that's what people always assume. The reality is, Lily and I had a complicated relationship from day one. While I embraced the twin thing, Lily resented it. She hated being mistaken for me, hated when people called us the twins instead of our names, and most of all, hated when I achieved something she hadn't. Growing up, I was the slightly more outgoing one, team captain in soccer, class president, first to get a boyfriend. Small differences, but to Lily, they were canyons. She'd smile in family photos while digging her nails into my arm just out of frame. She'd congratulate me on awards, then accidentally spill something on my dress at the ceremony. Little acts of sabotage that everyone dismissed as sibling rivalry. By adulthood, we'd established an uneasy peace. We attended different colleges, built separate friend groups, and carved out our own identities. I became an environmental engineer, while Lily went into marketing. We'd see each other at family events and managed to be cordial, sometimes even warm. I thought we'd outgrown the competition. Then I met Ryan. Ryan was everything, kind, brilliant, funny, and somehow completely unfazed by the twin dynamic. He never mixed us up, not even once. He'd say, "I don't know how anyone could confuse you two. You're nothing alike." Lily hated him for it. Where others saw identical faces, he saw only me, and it drove her crazy. When Ryan proposed after 2 years of dating, Lily's congratulations came through gritted teeth. At our engagement party, she got drunk and told one of my friends, "She always gets everything first." I pretended not to hear it. Family peace was worth a little willful ignorance, I thought. 3 months before our wedding, I got the career opportunity of a lifetime, leading an environmental impact study in Malaysia for a major sustainable development project. 3 months abroad, career defining work, but terrible timing with the wedding. Ryan insisted I go. The wedding can wait, he said. This is your dream job. We postponed the ceremony until after my return, and I left with a mix of excitement and guilt. That's when Lily offered to help. I'll check on your apartment, water your plants, maybe meet Ryan for coffee occasionally so he's not lonely, she said. It's the least I can do. I was touched by her apparent maturity and acceptance. Finally, I thought, we were moving past our issues. The first month went smoothly. Ryan and I video chatted daily, and he mentioned meeting Lily for coffee once or twice. She's really making an effort, he told me. I think she's finally warming up to me. By month 2, something felt off. Ryan's texts included references to conversations we'd never had, like we talked about yesterday, attached to topics we hadn't discussed. When I'd mention it, he'd get confused. Maybe you're just tired and forgot, he'd say. I chalked it up to time zone confusion and the exhaustion of fieldwork. Then came a photo that made my blood run cold. Ryan sent a selfie from our favorite restaurant, saying he wished I was there. In the background, barely visible, was a woman's hand with a bracelet. My bracelet, the one I'd accidentally left behind. I zoomed in, studying it, telling myself there must be an explanation. When I casually asked who he was dining with, he replied, "Just missing you having dinner alone." He wasn't alone, and that wasn't my bracelet sitting at home. It was on someone's wrist. I requested to end my assignment early, citing a family emergency. 2 weeks before my scheduled return, I was on a flight home, my mind racing with possibilities, each worse than the last. I told no one I was coming back early. I wanted the element of surprise. I got it, along with the shock of my life. After dropping my bags at my apartment, where I noticed subtle changes, things moved, different products in the shower, I headed to Ryan's place. He wasn't there. On a hunch, I went to Bistro Marcel, our restaurant. Through the window, I saw them at our regular table. Ryan and me? No, not me. Lily. Wearing my clothes, a dress I'd left behind, my hairstyle, my signature red lipstick, even sitting the way I sit, with one leg tucked under the other. She was wearing my engagement ring, the one I'd left behind because I didn't want to lose it in the field. I stood frozen outside, watching this surreal scene unfold. Ryan reached across the table and took her hand, my hand, as far as he knew. He was looking at her with such love, such familiarity. My stomach lurched. I walked in, the hostess greeting me with visible confusion as she looked back and forth between me and Lily. I approached the table slowly. Ryan saw me and his expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to dawning horror as he looked between us. 2 identical women, one whose hand he was holding, one standing shell-shocked in travel clothes. "Ryan," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I came home early." Lily didn't even try to run or hide. Instead, she smiled, a cold, triumphant smile, and said, "Surprise, sis. I think Ryan prefers the upgraded version." Who even says something like that? It's like she'd been practicing her supervillain speech in the mirror. The entire restaurant had gone silent, everyone watching our private nightmare unfold in public. Ryan jerked his hand away from hers, standing so quickly his chair crashed backward. What the hell is happening? What is this? His eyes darted between us in panic. As the truth dawned on him, he stumbled backward, his face ashen. "Oh my God! Oh my God!" He turned to Lily. You told me Olivia extended her trip. I've been..." He couldn't even finish the sentence. It turns out Lily had constructed an elaborate deception. After our coffee meetings became regular, she started showing up at Ryan's apartment, dressed like me, claiming I'd called and asked her to drop off things. Eventually, she told him I'd extended my assignment and asked her to keep him company. She'd been methodically replacing me in my own life. wearing my clothes, my perfume, styling her hair identically to mine. She'd been responding to his texts on my behalf, calling him from a spoofed number, even sleeping in my apartment. And Ryan, who thought he'd never confuse us, had been completely fooled because he'd had no reason to suspect the woman claiming to be his fiancée wasn't me. Why would he? What kind of person impersonates their twin to steal their life? The level of planning, the calculated deception, the sheer psychological warfare of it all, it's beyond comprehension. This wasn't opportunistic betrayal. This was a meticulously crafted campaign to literally become me. The aftermath was as messy as you'd imagine. Ryan was devastated, horrified that he'd been intimate with Lily thinking she was me. Our relationship couldn't survive it, not because he was at fault, but because every time we looked at each other, we both saw the deception. The trust was irrevocably broken. Lily was eventually diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and began intensive treatment. My parents tried to convince me it was the mental illness, not her. That caused this behavior. Maybe that's true, but understanding doesn't erase the betrayal. I moved to another city, cut all contact with Lily, and changed my appearance drastically. Short hair dyed black, new wardrobe, even colored contacts sometimes. I needed to look in the mirror and see only myself, not a face she could use as a mask. It's been 4 years. Ryan and I have both moved on to new relationships. I've started allowing limited supervised contact with Lily, always in family settings, never one-on-one. Her treatment seems to be helping, but some boundaries can never be crossed again. I'll never share details about my relationships with her. My current boyfriend knows of her existence but has never met her, and if we ever marry, she won't be invited. The strangest part is mourning someone who's still alive. I lost my twin, my mirror, the person who shared my face. But I gained something too, an unshakable sense of who I am beyond physical appearance. Lily could steal my face, my clothes, even temporarily my fiancé, but she couldn't take myself. Family betrayals cut deepest of all, especially when they happen at moments when you're already vulnerable. I never meant for things to go this far. It started 3 years ago with a legitimate injury. I really did hurt my back while working construction. Slipped disc, nerve compression, the works. The pain was excruciating, and the doctor said I needed to take at least 6 months off physical labor. The problem was I had rent to pay, and disability only covered about 60% of my former income. The first cash job was innocent enough. My buddy needed a DJ for his birthday party, and I figured sitting down pushing buttons wouldn't aggravate my back too much. The money was good, $300 for 4 hours of work, and nobody had to know. That gig led to another, then another, until I had a steady stream of weekend work playing music at parties, small weddings, and clubs. Yes, I was technically committing fraud. No, I didn't feel great about it. But in my mind, I was just supplementing my income until I could get back on my feet, literally. The problem was, even after my back started improving, the disability checks were too tempting to give up, especially as my DJ business grew. I kept up the charade, using a cane in public, moving slowly, wincing at the right moments when my disability caseworker checked in. My sister Emma always suspected something was off. Emma was the golden child, straight A student, successful accountant, perfect house in the suburbs with her perfect husband and their perfect twins. She'd give me these looks when I'd mention a bad pain day, but then catch me carrying groceries without issue. She never said anything directly, but I could feel her judgment like a physical weight. Our relationship had always been strained. Emma was 4 years older and never let me forget how much more responsible she was. When we were kids, she was the one who'd tell our parents if I broke a rule or got in trouble at school. As adults, she constantly offered helpful advice about how I could get my life together if I just worked harder, saved more, and generally became more like her. Then came the accident. Our parents were driving home from their anniversary dinner when a drunk driver hit them head on. They died instantly. The grief was overwhelming, like someone had reached into my chest and crushed my heart in their fist. Whatever our differences, Emma and I were united in our loss, making funeral arrangements together through a fog of shock and pain. The day of the funeral, I played my part perfectly, leaned heavily on my cane, grimaced with each step, accepted help from relatives to navigate the church steps. I wasn't entirely faking. Grief made my body ache in ways I hadn't expected, and standing for long periods still genuinely hurt my back. But I was definitely exaggerating for the benefit of my disability caseworker, Miss Patel, who had known my parents through community events and came to pay her respects. The service was beautiful. The church was packed. Our parents had been beloved community members, involved in everything from food drives to literacy programs. When it was time for eulogies, Emma went first. She spoke eloquently about our parents' love story, their dedication to family, their community service. There wasn't a dry eye in the house. Then, just as she seemed to be wrapping up, her tone changed. "Before I finish," she said, her voice suddenly sharp, "I want to honor our parents' commitment to honesty and integrity." She pulled out her phone. "Mom and Dad deserve the truth in life, and they deserve it in death too." My stomach dropped. I knew. Somehow, I just knew. Emma tapped her phone, and the church's sound system, which had been playing soft music, suddenly blasted club music. On the large memorial display screen meant for family photos, a video began playing. It was me, from the previous weekend, DJing at Club Vortex. There I was, dancing behind the booth, lifting heavy equipment, not a cane in sight, the timestamp clearly visible in the corner. "This is my brother last weekend," Emma announced, her voice cutting through my musical set like a knife. "The same brother who's been claiming total disability for 3 years. The same brother who just limped down this very aisle." She turned to face me directly. "Mum and Dad deserved better than a son who lies to everyone." The entire congregation turned to stare at me, including Miss Patel, whose expression morphed from sympathy to shocked understanding. In that moment, I wished the ground would open up and swallow me whole. Of all the times and places Emma could have chosen to expose me, at our parents' funeral, really, there's betrayal, and then there's whatever this was. Public execution would have been more merciful than watching 200 people realize I was a fraud while sitting next to my parents' caskets. The fallout was as swift as it was severe. Ms. Patel launched an immediate investigation. I lost my benefits, of course, and had to pay back everything I'd received while working, nearly $80,000 with penalties. I narrowly avoided jail time only because I had no previous record and agreed to a strict repayment plan. My reputation in our community was shattered. People who'd hugged me at the funeral now crossed the street to avoid me. The only silver lining, though Emma certainly didn't see it that way, came when our parents' will was read. They left Emma the family home and a few specific items, but I received the bulk of their modest financial assets. Their lawyer explained that they'd structured things this way because they believed I was genuinely struggling with a disability while Emma was financially secure. They wanted to make sure I'd be okay. When Emma discovered that her gotcha moment had actually cost her a significant portion of the inheritance, she was livid. The final confrontation happened at the lawyer's office, where she accused me of manipulating our parents even in death. "You didn't just defraud the government," she hissed. "You defrauded them too. They felt sorry for you." "You think I wanted their pity?" I fired back. "You think I enjoyed being the screw-up while you were the perfect child? You could have talked to me privately about your suspicions. Instead, you humiliated me at their funeral." "Their funeral?" "Emma." "You deserved it," she said coldly. "Maybe I did," I admitted, "but they didn't. You turned their funeral into a spectacle, and for what? So you could finally prove you were right about me? Congratulations. You've always been right about me. Happy now?" She didn't answer, just gathered her things and walked out. That was 3 years ago, and we haven't had a real conversation since. The irony is, my back eventually healed completely. I used part of the inheritance to make restitution for the disability fraud and invested the rest in legitimate business equipment. I now run a successful mobile DJ company, all above board, taxes paid, properly insured. I sometimes wonder if our parents somehow knew what would happen if their decision was less about taking care of me and more about forcing Emma and me to face our issues with each other. We see each other at family gatherings, weddings, our cousins' kids' graduations, that sort of thing. We maintain a cold civility for everyone else's sake. She has her life, I have mine, and the bridge between us is thoroughly burned. I've had a lot of time to think about what happened. Was I wrong to commit fraud? Absolutely. Was Emma wrong to expose me that way? Also, yes. Some days I think we both betrayed our parents in different ways. Me by lying about my condition, her by turning their funeral into an ambush. Neither of us walked away with clean hands or clear consciences. Finding out shocking truths about your family can permanently alter your life path, as one Redditor discovered when a promotion at work revealed an unexpected connection. I'd been working at Davidson Financial Services for just over 3 years when they announced the regional manager position was opening up. From day one, I'd been a standout performer, consistently exceeding my targets, bringing in new clients, mentoring junior staff. My quarterly reviews were practically love letters from upper management. So when Mr. Davidson, the CEO, called me into his office and said I was on the short list for the promotion, I wasn't surprised. Confident? Yes. Entitled? No. I'd earned this. The selection process was rigorous. 3 rounds of interviews, a presentation on my 5-year vision for the region, even a psychological evaluation to ensure I could handle the pressure. By the final interview, it was down to me and one other candidate, Bryce, who was objectively less qualified but played golf with the board members. Classic corporate America, right? The final interview was with Mr. Davidson himself. I'd always had a decent relationship with him. Professional, respectful, but not particularly warm. He was one of those old-school executives who kept a certain distance from employees. His wife, Mrs. Davidson, was the complete opposite. As the office administrator, she was the heart of the company, remembered everyone's birthdays, organized the holiday parties, kept the place running smoothly. She'd always been especially kind to me, checking in regularly, bringing me coffee during late nights. I figured she was just being nice to a young employee who didn't have much family support. I walked into that final interview ready to seal the deal. The first 30 minutes went perfectly. I answered every question thoughtfully, demonstrated my knowledge of the company inside and out, even made the usually stoic Mr. Davidson laugh a couple times. I was practically mentally decorating my new corner office. Then he noticed my birthmark. It's nothing dramatic, just a small, distinctive pattern on my right wrist that looks vaguely like a crescent moon. I usually cover it with my watch or shirt sleeve, but I gestured enthusiastically while explaining a growth strategy, and my sleeve had ridden up. Mr. Davidson's eyes locked onto it, and his entire demeanor changed. Mid-sentence, he interrupted me. "Where did you get that?" he asked, pointing to my wrist. "The birthmark? I've had it since birth," I said, confused by the abrupt change of subject. "You were adopted, correct? That's in your personnel file." His voice had a strange edge to it. Now I was really thrown. My adoption had nothing to do with the position, and it wasn't something I discussed at work. "Yes, that's right." "Where? When?" The questions came rapid fire, his face increasingly tense. "Chicago, 1992. Mr. Davidson, I'm not sure what this has to do with—" He cut me off. "I think we've covered everything for today. Thank you for your time." Just like that, the interview was over. I left his office confused and unsettled. Something had happened, but I couldn't figure out what exactly. Had I said something wrong? Was the birthmark somehow offensive to him? The next morning, the announcement went out. Bryce had been named the new regional manager. No explanation, no feedback on why I'd been passed over. Just a company-wide email congratulating him on his new role. Nothing quite matches the special kind of fury that comes from watching someone who doesn't deserve it take something you've earned. It's like watching someone else open your birthday presents while everyone sings to them instead. I was furious, but also deeply confused. What had happened in that interview? Why the sudden interest in my adoption and birthmark? Something wasn't adding up. In my frustration, I sought out the one person at the company who'd always been in my corner, Mrs. Davidson. She had a way of cutting through corporate politics, and I hoped she might have some insight into her husband's bizarre behavior. I found her in the break room and asked if we could speak privately. In her office, I explained what had happened, the strange turn in the interview, the questions about my adoption and birthmark, the abrupt ending, and the subsequent promotion decision. As I spoke, Mrs. Davidson's face went through a remarkable transformation, from concern to shock to what I can only describe as barely contained panic. When I showed her my birthmark, she actually gasped out loud. "Are you all right, Mrs. Davidson?" I asked, genuinely concerned. She looked like she might faint. "I need to tell you something," she whispered, her hands trembling as she closed her office door. "Something I've never told anyone at this company, not even my husband." What came next changed my life forever. In halting, emotional sentences, Mrs. Davidson revealed that in 1992, she had given birth to a baby boy in Chicago. She was young, unmarried, and not ready to be a mother. She made the heartbreaking decision to place him for adoption, but before saying goodbye, she memorized every detail of her son, including a distinctive, crescent-shaped birthmark on his right wrist. "I've always wondered about you," she said, tears streaming down her face. "When you applied here 3 years ago, your resume mentioned you were from Chicago, and something just drew me to you. I never imagined, I never dreamed." I sat there stunned, trying to process what she was saying. Mrs. Davidson, the kind maternal figure who'd taken me under her wing from day one, was my biological mother. The odds against this coincidence were astronomical. Yet, here we were. "Does Mr. Davidson know?" I finally managed to ask. "No," she said firmly. "We met 2 years after I placed you for adoption. I never told him about you. He's always been traditional, very concerned with appearances. I was afraid it would change how he saw me." Now his reaction made perfect sense. He hadn't recognized me as his wife's son. He couldn't have. But he'd recognized the birthmark. Mrs. Davidson kept photos of her relatives, and somewhere in those family albums must have been someone else with the same distinctive mark. "He thinks I'm having an affair," she realized aloud. "He thinks you're evidence of infidelity." And that's when everything unraveled. The promotion, the strange interview, the sudden coldness. It wasn't about my qualifications. Mr. Davison thought I was his wife's lover, or love child from an affair. In his mind, promoting me would be legitimizing something shameful. We agreed to DNA testing, which confirmed what we already knew. Mrs. Davidson was my biological mother. Armed with this evidence, she finally told her husband the truth, that she'd had a child before they met, that by incredible coincidence that child had ended up working at his company, and that his decision to deny me the promotion was based on a completely false assumption. His response? The next day, I received an official offer for a position at another branch, with a substantial raise to make this easier for everyone. No acknowledgement of his mistake, no apology for the discrimination, just an attempt to sweep me under the rug. The sheer audacity of thinking he could just ship off his wife's long-lost son to another office like an inconvenient piece of furniture, as if discovering your birth mother is something that can be resolved with a corporate transfer and a 15% bump in salary. I declined the offer and instead filed a discrimination claim with the EEOC. The lawsuit that followed was brutal but necessary. The company tried to settle quietly, but I insisted on a public hearing. The evidence was overwhelming: documentation of my performance, witness testimonies about Mr. Davidson's behavior after discovering my birthmark, and the DNA results proving Mrs. Davidson was my birth mother. We won. A substantial settlement and a very public black eye for both Mr. Davidson and the company. I took a position with their biggest competitor the following month, and 3 major clients followed me. It wasn't revenge exactly, just the natural consequence of his actions. Mrs. Davidson filed for divorce shortly after the lawsuit concluded. 30 years of marriage ended not because she'd given up a child before they met, but because of how he'd responded to discovering that child's existence. She reached out to me cautiously, asking if I'd be open to developing a relationship. We started slowly, coffee once a month, then lunch every other week. Now we have standing Sunday dinner dates where we're gradually filling in the 30-year gap in each other's lives. Mr. Davidson's career never recovered from the scandal. Last I heard, he'd taken early retirement and moved to Florida. His reputation in the industry is shot. Turns out discriminating against an employee because you think they're your wife's illegitimate child doesn't play well in corporate America. Who knew? Sometimes the people we encounter randomly in everyday life turn out to be connected to us in ways we never imagined. I've always been a creature of habit. Same coffee shop every morning, same order. Large cold brew, no room. Same tip, $2 in the jar. Same table by the window. The baristas at Moonlight Coffee knew me so well they'd start making my drink the moment I walked in. It was comfortable, predictable, safe. That all changed when Julia started working there. At first, it was just little things. She'd give me free upgrades, an extra shot of espresso, a larger size than I paid for, a pastry that was going to be thrown out anyway. She remembered my name immediately, which wasn't that unusual, but she also remembered random details I'd mentioned in passing conversations with other baristas, things I barely remembered saying myself. "How was your presentation on the Morrison account?" she asked one morning, sliding my cold brew across the counter. I hesitated. "Fine, thanks. How did you know about that?" "You mentioned it to Carlos last week," she said with a bright smile. "I have a good memory for details." I nodded, feeling slightly uneasy but brushing it off. So she paid attention to customers. That's good customer service, right? But then I started seeing her in places she shouldn't be. Waiting at my bus stop, despite the fact she worked at a coffee shop in the opposite direction. Reading a book outside my apartment building. Once, most disturbingly, using the elliptical machine 2 down from mine at my gym at 10 p.m. When I mentioned these coincidences to friends, they laughed it off. "Sounds like someone has a crush on you," my roommate said. "She's probably just trying to get your attention." "By following me to the gym? That's not cute, that's creepy," I protested. "Maybe you're being paranoid. It's a small neighborhood. People run into each other." But the small things started adding up in a way that was impossible to ignore. She knew what grocery store I used. She mentioned a restaurant I'd been to the previous weekend, though I hadn't told anyone at the coffee shop about it. She commented on a new jacket the first day I wore it, saying the color brought out my eyes. There's something uniquely unsettling about realizing someone is watching your life without your knowledge. It's like suddenly discovering you've been on a reality show without consenting to it. Then came the breaking point. After a late night at work, I returned to my apartment to find an envelope taped to my door. Inside were photos I'd never seen before. Photos of me as a child. Me as a toddler in a red sweater. Me at about 5, blowing out birthday candles. Me at maybe 7 or 8, at a beach I didn't recognize. With them was a handwritten note. "I've waited 28 years to find you. I'm so proud of the person you've become." I called the police immediately. This wasn't cute. This wasn't a crush. This was full-blown stalking, and I was terrified. The officers who responded took the photos, a note as evidence, dusted for fingerprints, and filed a report. They advised me to stay with a friend for a few days while they investigated. I was crashing on my buddy Mike's couch when I got the call from Detective Rivera. "We've identified your stalker," she said, her voice strangely gentle. "It's the barista, Julia Winters. But there's something you should know. The situation is more complicated than we initially thought." "What do you mean complicated?" I demanded. "She's been following me for months. She had photos of me as a child that I've never even seen. How is that complicated?" "Mr. Foster, during questioning, Ms. Winters produced documentation, adoption papers and birth certificates. According to these documents, she is your biological mother." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. My biological mother? I knew I was adopted. My parents had always been open about that, but I'd never searched for my birth parents. The closed adoption had been my birth mother's choice, according to the limited information I had. "That's impossible," I said. "This has to be some elaborate scam." "We've verified the documentation," Detective Rivera replied, "and a preliminary DNA comparison with items from your apartment suggests there's a familial match. She claims she recognized you from family resemblance and your unusual first name when you started coming to the coffee shop. Then well, she orchestrated getting hired at places you frequent to observe you before deciding how to approach." I hung up and sat in stunned silence. The woman who had been terrifying me for months was the woman who had given birth to me. The revelation didn't make her behavior less disturbing. If anything, it made it more bizarre. What kind of person stalks their own child instead of just introducing themselves? The police had detained Julia, but the ball was now in my court regarding how to proceed. Did I want to press charges, get a restraining order, or meet with her under controlled circumstances? After days of agonizing, I agreed to a mediated meeting at the police station. Walking into that room was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Julia sat across the table looking smaller somehow, her hands fidgeting nervously with a tissue. "I know I scared you," were her first words. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know how to approach you directly. I was afraid you'd reject me before I got to know you." Over the next 2 hours, her story unfolded. She'd been 17 when she had me, young, scared, with no support system. Her parents had forced the adoption, not allowing her any contact. She'd spent years regretting that decision, imagining what her child might be like, wondering if I hated her. When she spotted me at the coffee shop, she convinced herself that fate had brought us together. But fear of rejection led her down an increasingly deranged path of observing me before revealing herself. What started as giving me free coffee escalated to applying for jobs at places I frequented, to full-blown stalking. "I know it was wrong," she said tearfully. "I know I violated your trust before you even knew who I was. I lost perspective. All I could think was that I needed to know you were okay, that you were happy." There's something profoundly strange about sitting across from someone who is simultaneously a complete stranger and the person who gave you life. I found myself studying her face for similarities. We had the same eyes, the same habit of tucking hair behind our ears when nervous. I decided not to pursue charges, on the condition that Julia agreed to therapy and that any future contact would be on my terms, with clear boundaries. The restraining order was dropped, and we began a careful, mediated relationship. That was 2 years ago. Today we meet once a month for coffee, at a different shop by mutual agreement. She's met my adoptive parents, who were surprisingly understanding after their initial shock and anger. They recognized that while her methods had been terrifying, her intentions weren't malicious, just incredibly misguided by decades of regret and longing. I've learned that human emotions can drive people to extremes that defy logical explanation. I've also learned that second chances are possible, but they require strict boundaries and constant vigilance. Julia and I will never have the mother-son relationship she might have hoped for. but we found a way to be in each other's lives that feels safe and, in its own way, healing. Family expectations can create unbearable pressure, especially when your refusal to conform leads to life-changing consequences. My father died when I was 14, aggressive cancer that took him from diagnosis to funeral in less than 8 months. The kind of loss that reshapes your entire world, especially as a teenager. Dad was my hero, the guy who taught me to fish, helped with science projects, and somehow made even my most embarrassing moments feel fixable. His last words to me were, "I'll always be your dad, kiddo. Always." 2 years after we lost him, my mum started dating again. I didn't begrudge her finding happiness. Dad wouldn't have wanted her to be alone forever. Then Richard entered our lives. He was fine, I guess. Stable job in insurance, decent sense of humor, treated my mum well. He moved into our house 6 months after they started dating, and they got married 4 months after that. From day one, Richard made it clear he wanted me to call him Dad. I made it equally clear that wasn't happening. My father hadn't been gone that long, and those final words to me, "I'll always be your dad," felt like a sacred promise I couldn't break. I explained this to Richard politely but firmly. "I respect you as my mum's husband and as an adult in my life," I told him, "but my dad is my dad. I'm happy to call you Richard." He seemed disappointed but said he understood. For the next 4 years, we maintained a cordial relationship. Not close, not distant, just respectfully coexisting. He came to my high school graduation, my soccer games, helped me move into my college dorm. Normal stepdad stuff. I always thanked him, was always polite, but I never called him dad. During college, Richard became increasingly involved in my education. He'd ask about my classes, offer to help with assignments, even drove 3 hours to bring me a new laptop when mine died during finals week. I was grateful for his support, especially since money had been tight since my father died. My mum had made it clear that without Richard's help, they couldn't afford to send me to my dream school. Then came my college graduation day. I'd been selected to give a short speech as a department honoree. My mum and Richard sat in the audience, both beaming with pride. Near the end of my speech, I included the obligatory thank yous. And finally, I want to thank my mum and Richard for their unwavering support through these 4 years. I couldn't have done it without you both. It was heartfelt and genuine. I was truly grateful, but apparently it wasn't enough. As I returned to my seat after the speech, I glanced over and noticed Richard's face had hardened into something unrecognizable. My mum was whispering urgently to him, but he shook his head sharply. Before the ceremony even ended, he stood up and walked out, leaving my confused mum behind. By the time the graduation finished and we found each other in the crowd, Richard was nowhere to be seen. My mum claimed he'd received an emergency work call and had to leave. I didn't believe it, but it was my graduation day, so I pushed my concerns aside and enjoyed the celebration with my friends. The next morning, Mum and I drove back home while Richard was supposedly still handling that work emergency. As we pulled into the driveway, I saw something that made my stomach drop. All my belongings piled on the front lawn. Books, clothes, childhood mementos, everything I'd left in my old bedroom was now sitting in sad heaps on the grass. Some things were already damp from morning dew. "What the hell?" I muttered, jumping out of the car before my mum had even parked. She looked equally shocked, hurrying to the front door only to find her key wouldn't work. The locks had been changed. After several minutes of frantic knocking, Richard finally opened the door. He spoke only to my mother, ignoring me completely. "He can come in when he's ready to apologize," he said coldly. "Apologize for what?" I demanded, stepping forward. Richard finally looked at me, his face twisted with an anger I'd never seen before. "For publicly humiliating me. 4 years I've supported you, paid for your education, treated you like a son, and you couldn't even acknowledge me as your parent in your speech. You thanked my mum and Richard like I'm just some guy, not the man who's been your father for 6 years." I was genuinely stunned. Richard, I thanked you by name. I specifically mentioned your support. But you wouldn't call me your dad, he snapped. After everything I've done, you still refuse to acknowledge me as your father. Then came the breaking point. My mum, tears streaming down her face, pulled me aside and dropped the bombshell. Honey, there's something you don't know, she said quietly. Richard agreed to pay for your college with the understanding that you'd eventually accept him as your father. He thought by graduation, after 4 years of his financial support, you'd have come around. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. So my education was conditional. There were secret strings attached that no one bothered to tell me about. Please, she begged, just call him Dad. Just say the words, even if you don't mean them right now. We can fix this. The sheer manipulation of it all hit me like a truck. For 4 years, this man had been tallying up everything he'd done for me, keeping a mental ledger, expecting to be paid back with the specific form of gratitude he wanted. Not genuine appreciation, which I'd given freely, but a performative acceptance of him replacing my father. I'm not going to pretend he's my dad when he's not, I said firmly. My father died. I'm grateful for Richard's support, but if it came with unspoken conditions, then it wasn't actually support. It was a transaction. The fallout was swift and severe. I packed what I could into my mum's car and called my dad's parents, my grandparents, who immediately offered me their guest room. Richard demanded repayment of all the money he'd spent on my education if I wouldn't be a proper son to him. My mother was torn between her husband and her child, tearfully begging me to reconsider even as she helped me gather my rain-soaked possessions from the lawn. That night, as I settled into my grandparents' house, my grandfather sat me down and told me he was proud of me. Your dad would be too, he said simply. Some things aren't for sale. Your father's memory is one of them. The irony of emotional manipulation disguised as generosity is that it reveals itself eventually. Once the mask slips, you can't unsee the control underneath what you thought was kindness. Over the next few months, the family split into factions. Some relatives thought I should have just said what Richard wanted to hear. It's just words, they argued. Others were firmly on my side, appalled by the conditional nature of his support. My mum remained caught in the middle, torn between the man she married and the child she raised. The resolution came unexpectedly. About 8 months after the graduation incident, my mum showed up at my grandparents' house with suitcases of her own. She discovered Richard had been hiding significant gambling debts, tens of thousands of dollars, and had actually remortgaged the house without telling her. The financial support he'd so proudly lauded over me had partly been an attempt to look good while his own finances were crumbling. It took nearly 2 years for my mom and me to fully repair our relationship. She eventually admitted that she'd known about Richard's expectation regarding the dad title, but had been afraid to tell me, hoping I'd naturally grow to see him that way. I chose wrong, she told me during a tearful reconciliation. I chose a husband's ego over my child's integrity. I'm so sorry. Today, 5 years later, Richard is out of our lives. My mum and I are close again, though we both carry scars from that period. I've learned an important lesson. Emotional manipulation masquerading as generosity isn't love, it's control. Real love doesn't come with hidden conditions or unspoken debts to be paid. Speaking of people who use their position of trust for revenge, imagine having your health deliberately put at risk by someone who should care for your well-being. I never thought I'd be in a car accident. You always think it happens to other people, you know. But one rainy Tuesday, a delivery truck ran a red light and slammed right into my driver's side door. I was lucky to be alive, according to the ER doctors, but my left knee had taken the brunt of the impact. The dashboard had collapsed, crushing my leg and shredding my ACL, MCL, and just about every other CL you can have in your knee. After the swelling went down, I was referred to Dr. Nathan Phillips for reconstructive surgery. Everyone at the hospital spoke about him like he was some kind of orthopedic god. You're so lucky to get Dr. Phillips. the nurses kept saying. He's the best knee surgeon in 3 states. I felt relieved. At least something was going right after the accident. The day before surgery, Meredith insisted on driving me to the pre-op appointment. We'd been dating for about 8 months at that point. She was brilliant, kind, and way out of my league, but for some reason, she'd chosen me. She worked as a pharmaceutical rep, so she knew her way around hospitals and spoke the language of medicine better than I did. During the pre-op consultation, Dr. Phillips was cordial and confident. He explained the procedure in detail, showed me diagrams, answered all my questions with patience. Then the nurse handed him my paperwork, and he saw my emergency contact, Meredith Phillips. The change was instantaneous. His smile vanished, replaced by a tight, cold expression I couldn't quite place. He glanced up at Meredith, who was sitting beside me. "You're listed as the emergency contact," he said flatly. "Any relation?" Meredith shifted uncomfortably. "Nathan, I didn't realize you were performing the surgery." That's when I realized Phillips. They had the same last name. This was Meredith's ex-husband, the one she rarely talked about except to say they divorced 2 years ago, and it hadn't been amicable. Dr. Phillips cleared his throat. "I see. Well, Mr. Carson, we'll proceed as scheduled tomorrow morning. Nurse Janice will go over the final preparations with you." He left without another word, the temperature in the room seemingly dropping 10 degrees in his wake. "That was your ex," I whispered to Meredith once he was gone. She nodded, her face pale. "I'm so sorry. I had no idea he was assigned to your case. Do you want to request another surgeon?" I considered it, but surgery was scheduled for 7 a.m. the next day. Finding another top orthopedic surgeon on such short notice seemed impossible, and I didn't want to delay. My pain was constant and debilitating. "It's fine," I assured her. "He's a professional. Our personal lives shouldn't matter." Famous last words, right? If I could go back in time, I'd slap myself for that naive statement. Medical professionals are still human, and humans can be petty, vindictive, and dangerous when their egos are bruised. The surgery itself was a blur. Anesthesia made sure of that. I remember counting backward from 10 and making it to maybe 7 before everything went dark. What I do remember clearly is waking up in far more pain than I'd been told to expect. Something wasn't right. My knee felt wrong. Not just surgical pain wrong, but fundamentally wrong, like pieces were in the incorrect places. The recovery nurse assured me everything had gone as well as could be expected, which in retrospect was an oddly phrased statement. When Meredith arrived, her face showed concern that mirrored my own fears. 3 days later, when the bandages came off for the first wound check, even I could see something was wrong. The incision was jagged, not the clean line I'd seen in before and after photos during my research. The knee itself was misshapen, swollen in all the wrong places. "This doesn't look right," I said to the resident checking my wound. He frowned, then quickly schooled his expression. "Post-op swelling affects everyone differently. Let's give it time." But time only confirmed my fears. My physical therapy was excruciating. Not normal surgical recovery pain, but sharp, wrong pain that indicated something was mechanically incorrect inside my knee. After 2 weeks of minimal progress, my PT recommended a follow-up MRI. The results necessitated a second surgery to correct complications from the first procedure, then a third because the second hadn't fully addressed the issues. That's when everything unraveled. During my third hospital stay, a night shift nurse named Valerie came into my room, looking troubled. She closed the door quietly behind her. "Mr. Carson," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I need to show you something." She pulled out my chart, not the electronic version on the tablet, but actual paper notes that were apparently still kept as backups. There, in handwriting I recognized as Dr. Phillips, was a note from my first surgery. "Patient dating ex-wife. Minimal effort procedure justified." My blood ran cold. He deliberately botched my surgery out of spite. This wasn't incompetence or bad luck. It was intentional harm inflicted by someone who had taken an oath to heal. I requested the surgical recording, hoping to find evidence of misconduct. Conveniently, there had been a technical malfunction during key portions of my procedure. When I confronted Dr. Phillips with the note Valerie had shown me, he didn't even try to deny it. He simply smiled coldly and said, "Prove it. It's your word against mine, and nobody will believe a handwritten note you claim to have seen." The level of calculated cruelty required to deliberately botch someone's surgery over a personal grudge. We're talking supervillain territory here. This wasn't just breaking medical ethics, it was sociopathic. I filed formal complaints with the hospital administration and the state medical board. During the investigation, something unexpected happened. 3 other former patients of Dr. Phillips came forward with similar stories. One was the brother of a lawyer who had represented Meredith in their divorce. Another was the cousin of a colleague who had received a promotion Dr. Phillips had wanted. The third was a former friend who had taken Meredith's side after the divorce. All had experienced complications, requiring multiple follow-up surgeries. All had permanent damage that didn't align with their original injuries or typical surgical risks. Meredith was devastated when she learned what her ex-husband had done. "This is why we divorced," she told me. "His vindictiveness. He never forgave perceived slights, but I never thought he'd use his medical position to hurt people." The hospital, terrified of the publicity nightmare, offered a substantial settlement in exchange for an NDA. I initially refused. I wanted the world to know what this monster had done. But the reality of my mounting medical bills and the uncertainty of a protracted legal battle eventually convinced me to accept. Dr. Phillips's surgical privileges were suspended during the investigation. As more evidence emerged, including testimonies from operating room staff who'd witnessed his deliberately negligent techniques, his medical license was revoked. He now faces criminal charges for multiple instances of medical malpractice and intentional harm. As for me, my knee will never fully recover, despite multiple corrective surgeries. I need a cane on bad days, which at 34 is not something I ever imagined. My running days are over, along with most high-impact activities I used to enjoy. Meredith stayed with me through it all. We're engaged now, planning a future that looks different than what we'd originally imagined but is still ours. The settlement money paid for a ranch-style house with no stairs and funded a small business I can operate even with my mobility limitations. I still struggle with how someone entrusted with healing could so callously cause harm. The power imbalance between doctor and patient is profound. We literally put our lives in their hands, trusting their commitment to, first, do no harm. When that trust is betrayed, it shakes your faith in the entire medical system. Just when you think you know someone completely, they can reveal a side of themselves you never imagined existed, like this Redditor whose perfect relationship was shattered by an unexpected visitor. I met Ellie at a friend's birthday party 3 years ago. She was standing alone by the snack table, looking slightly out of place in a way that I found endearing. We started chatting about the questionable choice of cheese on the charcuterie board and ended up talking for hours. By the end of the night, I knew 2 things about her. She had the most infectious laugh I'd ever heard, and she was a widow. The widow part came up naturally when I asked if she was from around here. "No," she'd said, her smile dimming slightly. "I moved here after my husband died. Needed a fresh start, you know." I didn't know actually, but I nodded sympathetically. Over the next few weeks of dating, Ellie's story unfolded. Her husband Alex had died 3 years earlier in a boating accident while they were vacationing in Mexico. "The weather turned suddenly," she explained one night over wine. "He took the boat out alone that morning. They found pieces of it washed up on shore, but never found him." Her voice always cracked at that part, and I'd hold her hand while she composed herself. It was tragic but also oddly romantic, the grieving widow finding love again. I was patient with her occasional distant moods, understanding when certain songs or movies would make her tear up unexpectedly. When she mentioned that the substantial life insurance payout had helped her rebuild her life, I thought only of how practical Alex had been to take care of her even after death. After 2 years together, we decided to take the next step. With her savings and my decent job as a software developer, we managed to buy a modest 3-bedroom house in a nice neighborhood. Nothing fancy, but it was ours, our fresh start together. Ellie took the lead on most of the purchasing process, as my workload was intense at the time. She handled the paperwork, the closing, all of it. I just showed up to sign where needed and transfer my portion of the down payment. The housewarming party was Ellie's idea. "We should fill this place with friends right away," she said. "Make it feel like home." So we invited about 30 people, my co-workers, her friends from her yoga studio, some neighbors. It was a sunny Saturday afternoon, the kind that feels full of promise. I was grilling in the backyard. Ellie was showing people around our new place. Music was playing, drinks were flowing. Everything was perfect. Then the doorbell rang. I was turning burgers when I heard Stacy, my co-worker, call out from inside, "I'll get it." Assuming it was more guests, I didn't think anything of it until I heard a commotion from the living room. Raised voices, a woman's scream, then complete silence except for the music still playing cheerfully in the background. When I walked in from the patio, the scene was surreal. Every guest was frozen in place, staring at the entryway where a man I'd never seen before stood holding a bouquet of lilies, Ellie's favorite flowers. Ellie herself was on the floor, having apparently fainted. And most disturbingly, no one was helping her. They were all just watching. "What's going on?" I asked, rushing to Ellie's side. "Someone call 911. "That won't be necessary," the man said calmly. "She's just shocked to see me. She'll come around in a minute." Something about his confident tone made me look up at him more carefully. He was tall, tan, with the kind of casual handsomeness that ages well. Early 40s maybe, salt and pepper hair that probably cost more to maintain than my monthly car payment. "Who are you?" I demanded, still kneeling beside Ellie, who was starting to stir. He smiled, not unkindly, but with a touch of something that made my stomach clench. "I'm Alex, Ellie's husband." The room started spinning. Alex, the dead husband, the boating accident in Mexico, the grieving widow story. It couldn't be possible. "Her husband died 3 years ago," I said stupidly, as if he might not know this crucial detail about himself. "That's what she was supposed to tell everyone," he replied, setting the flowers down on our new console table. "That was the plan, at least." Ellie's eyes fluttered open at that moment. When she saw Alex standing there, she made a sound I've never heard before or since, a kind of strangled gasp that didn't seem entirely human. She scrambled backward on the floor until her back hit the wall. "You're supposed to be in Belize," she whispered. "Not, you're supposed to be dead. Not, this is impossible. But you're supposed to be in Belize." And that's when everything unraveled. As our guests stood in horrified fascination, nobody even pretended they weren't listening. Alex explained the whole sordid story. There was no boating accident. Instead, Alex had racked up massive gambling debts to some very dangerous people. The vacation in Mexico had been his escape plan. He had faked his death with Ellie's help, intending for her to collect his $2 million life insurance policy and join him in Belize 6 months later with the money. Except she never showed up. Instead, she took the money, moved to our city, and eventually met me. "I waited a year," Alex said, his calm facade finally cracking. "A year! Then I had to start tracking you down without exposing myself. Do you have any idea how difficult that was?" Ellie had managed to stand up by then, her face a mask of defiance and fear. "You were cheating on me with my sister. I found the text the day before we left for Mexico. You didn't think I knew, but I did." Alex looked genuinely surprised at this. So this was revenge? This was survival, she shot back. You were going to take that money and disappear with her once I brought it to you. I'm not stupid, Alex. I stood there trying to process that my relationship of 2 years, my entire life with Ellie, had been built on an elaborate lie. The woman I loved had never been a grieving widow. She was an insurance fraudster with a living husband. I have something to show you, Alex said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a folded document that looked official. Our marriage certificate, still valid as I'm very much alive, which means whatever relationship you've established here is, well, let's say, complicated. The party guests began to murmur among themselves. Someone, thanks a lot, Dave from accounting, was clearly recording this on their phone. My humiliation was going to be immortalized on social media. Get out, I finally managed to say. Both of you, get out of my house. Alex raised an eyebrow. Technically, it's Ellie's house, or rather, it was purchased with my life insurance money, which makes it evidence in a fraud case. He wasn't wrong, as I would soon discover. The insurance company pressed charges against both Ellie and Alex once the story broke. During the investigation, I learned that our dream house had been purchased primarily with the fraudulent insurance payout. While I contributed to the down payment, the bulk had come from Ellie, or rather from Allstate. The house was seized as part of the asset recovery. I lost my investment completely and had to move back to a small one-bedroom apartment. My credit score tanked, my reputation at work suffered, thanks again, Dave, and my trust in humanity took a nosedive that it's still recovering from. Ellie eventually cut a deal testifying against Alex and revealing his connections to organized crime in exchange for a reduced sentence. I didn't attend her sentencing. The last I heard, she's serving 3 years in a minimum security facility. Alex got 8 years, mostly for the organized crime connections rather than the insurance fraud. As for me, I've developed what my therapist calls pathological verification tendencies. I background check everyone I date. I require documentation for any major claim. And yes, I've requested death certificates when potential partners mention deceased spouses. Most find it weird and intrusive, which it absolutely is, but so is finding out your girlfriend's dead husband is alive and well, and standing in your living room holding lilies. Deception in relationships can leave lasting scars, especially when someone goes to extreme lengths to sabotage your happiness. Starting a new job is always a mix of excitement and anxiety. You're eager to prove yourself professionally, but there's also that awkward period of trying to figure out who everyone is and where you fit in socially. For me, the social part seemed to be going surprisingly well. Within my first month at Horizon Marketing, I'd made friends with several colleagues and even had a few of them express interest in dating me. As someone who'd been single for almost a year, this was a welcome development. My first date was with Michael from graphic design. We planned dinner at this trendy Italian place downtown. The evening started great. Good conversation, shared interests, definite chemistry. Then, halfway through my pasta, I started feeling off. By dessert, I was sweating, dizzy, and eventually had to make a mad dash to the bathroom where I spent the next 30 minutes violently ill. Michael drove me home, but understandably wasn't eager for a second date with someone who'd thrown up after eating with him. Food poisoning happens, Claire from accounting said sympathetically when I told her about it the next day. She'd been especially welcoming since I started, always bringing me coffee and checking in. Don't let it discourage you. So I didn't. 2 weeks later, I agreed to go out with Amber from client services. We were having drinks at a rooftop bar when my phone exploded with texts and calls from an unknown number, claiming to be my roommate Jake's cousin, saying he'd been rushed to the hospital after collapsing. I apologized profusely to Amber and rushed to the hospital, only to find no record of Jake being admitted. When I called him, he was perfectly fine, playing video games at home and completely confused about why I thought he was hospitalized. My third date was with Taylor from IT. We made it through dinner without incident, but as we were deciding whether to get dessert, the fire alarm went off. The entire restaurant evacuated, standing in the cold for 45 minutes while firefighters searched the building, ultimately finding no fire. By the time we were allowed back in, the kitchen had closed and the moment was thoroughly ruined. 3 dates, 3 disasters. It seemed like I was cursed. Maybe it's just not meant to be right now, Claire said, bringing me a sympathy latte the morning after the fire alarm fiasco. Timing is everything with relationships. I might have believed it was just bad luck, except for what happened next. I was supposed to meet up with Jessie from marketing for a coffee date during lunch. As I was getting ready to leave, I received an email apparently from Jessie cancelling our date because of a family emergency. But when I bumped into Jessie later that day and expressed my condolences, they looked completely confused. They'd never sent that email and had been waiting for me at the cafe. Something wasn't adding up. 4 different dates with 4 different people, all ruined in increasingly bizarre ways. This wasn't coincidence. This was sabotage. I started paying more attention to the patterns. Who knew about all my dates? Who always seemed to be around afterward with sympathy and support? Claire from accounting. The same Claire who always asked detailed questions about my plans, who had access to the company email system, who had somehow managed to get my personal phone number early on. The next time she came by my desk with coffee and asked innocently if I had plans that weekend, I did, a date with someone who worked in another building entirely, which I hadn't mentioned to anyone at the office. I decided to set a trap. Actually, yes, I said. I'm going to that new sushi place on Main Street on Saturday. Reservation at 8. Oh, that place is supposed to be amazing, she replied. Who's the lucky person? I gave her a vague answer about meeting an old friend and watched her face carefully. Something flickered in her eyes, calculation, maybe even excitement. On Saturday, I didn't go to the sushi restaurant. Instead, I had a friend go in my place to watch what happened. Sure enough, at 7:55, Claire arrived and sat at the bar with a clear view of all the tables. At 8:20, she made a phone call. At 8:25, the restaurant received an anonymous call about a gas leak causing an evacuation. Date successfully sabotaged, except I wasn't actually there. On Monday, I confronted her in the break room when no one else was around. I know what you've been doing, I said without preamble. What I don't know is why. She denied it at first, but when I laid out all the evidence, the suspicious timing, my friend spotting her at the restaurant, the pattern of disasters, she crumbled. What came next was a confession so bizarre I could barely process it. It's not about you, she said, tears streaming down her face. It's about Jake. My roommate Jake? I asked, completely confused. We dated last year, she explained. It was intense, at least for me. When he broke up with me, he said I was too controlling. Can you believe that? Me? Too controlling? The irony of her asking this while confessing to elaborately controlling my dating life was apparently lost on her. This woman was operating on a level of delusion that would make supervillains take notes. When I saw on your social media that you were his new roommate, she continued, I knew it was fate. I applied for the job here specifically to get close to you, to become your friend. The plan was to make you dependent on me emotionally, while ensuring no one else would date you. Eventually, I'd suggest moving in together when your lease with Jake was up. He'd see how happy we were and realize what he lost. I stood there, mouth literally hanging open. So you orchestrated food poisoning, fake emergency calls and false fire alarms to prevent me from dating as revenge against my roommate? It sounds crazy when you say it like that, she muttered. It is crazy when you say it like that, because it is crazy, I replied. Claire, we've known each other for 3 months. You built your entire life around an elaborate revenge fantasy against a guy you dated briefly a year ago. Do you not see how absolutely unhinged that is? The next day, I went to HR with my concerns. Their investigation revealed Claire had falsified parts of her employment history to get hired. When they spoke to Jake about the situation, he confirmed they had dated briefly, but he'd ended things after discovering some disturbing behaviors. She'd been tracking his location through apps, creating fake social media profiles to test his loyalty, and showing up unannounced at his workplace. Claire was terminated immediately. I requested and received a transfer to a different department and now thoroughly background check anyone interested in dating me. I've also become much more careful about what I share about my living situation with coworkers. Jake and I still laugh about it sometimes, how his ex-girlfriend infiltrated my workplace like some kind of deranged spy to execute the world's most convoluted revenge plan. But it also taught me that revenge plots aren't just in movies. Real people with real issues can go to extreme lengths when they feel wronged. Sometimes the people we need to worry about aren't our peers, but those with authority over us, as one teenager discovered when family drama escalated to legal nightmare. I never expected to be sued before I even graduated high school. Legal action wasn't exactly on my senior year bingo card, right between apply to colleges and try not to sleep through homeroom. But here I was, 17 years old and being served papers by a process server during third period chemistry. It all started when my best friend Zoe broke down in the school parking lot 2 months earlier. We'd been inseparable since sixth grade, the kind of friendship where you finish each other's sentences and your parents have given up trying to remember whose house you're sleeping at on any given weekend. So when she called me sobbing, barely able to form words, I dropped everything and found her hunched over the steering wheel of her car. "I think my dad is having an affair," she managed between sobs, "with Ms. Peterson." Ms. Peterson, our English teacher, the young cool one who wore vintage clothes and actually made Shakespeare interesting, the one who had been giving Zoe's dad, Mr. Anderson, private poetry lessons for his law firm's newsletter. "Are you sure?" I asked, my stomach sinking. That's a serious accusation." Zoe nodded miserably. "I saw texts on his phone last night when he left it on the counter. They weren't about poetry." She showed me screenshots she'd taken. Nothing explicitly damning, but definitely inappropriate. Lots of "can't wait to see you" and "our special time" messages. Suspicious, but not conclusive. "My mum deserves to know," Zoe said firmly, "but she won't believe it without proof. She thinks Dad walks on water." That's how Operation Cheetah Cheetah began. Looking back, maybe I should have encouraged Zoe to talk to a school counselor or another adult. But when your best friend is in pain, your first instinct is to help, not to consider the potential legal ramifications of amateur detective work. For the next 2 weeks, we gathered evidence. Zoe tracked her dad's working late schedule, and we'd follow him from a distance. I took photos when he met Ms. Peterson at a restaurant 20 miles from town, their hands intertwined across the table, documented the times they entered and exited a motel on the highway, noted the pattern of Ms. Peterson calling in a substitute teacher on the same days Mr. Anderson told his family he had client meetings out of town. Felt awful and exciting at the same time, like we were characters in some teen detective novel, except the mystery was destroying my best friend's family in real time. When we had enough evidence, Zoe showed everything to her mum. Mrs. Anderson went through all the stages of grief in about 48 hours: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and finally, a cold, calculated acceptance that involved the best divorce attorney in the neighboring county. Mr. Anderson moved out that weekend. The divorce proceedings began. Zoe started therapy. Things were messy but progressing as well as could be expected. I figured my part in the drama was over. Then came the lawsuit. I was in chemistry class when the school secretary called me to the front office. There stood a man in a suit who handed me an envelope and asked me to sign for it. Inside was a summons for a civil case, Anderson vs. Mitchell. Me. I was being sued for $250,000 for intentional interference with marital relations. The complaint alleged that I had maliciously orchestrated a campaign to destroy plaintiff's marriage and manipulated his impressionable daughter into participating in surveillance activities. According to the lawsuit, I did this because Mr. Anderson had refused to write me a college recommendation letter earlier that year, which was news to me since I'd never asked him for one. The legal jargon made it sound like I was some kind of teenage supervillain who'd masterminded the destruction of a perfect marriage out of petty revenge. In reality, I was just trying to help my heartbroken friend confirm what she already suspected. The level of delusion required to sue a minor for exposing your own affair, instead of, I don't know, accepting responsibility for cheating on your wife. It's giving serious blame the messenger energy on steroids. When I showed my parents the lawsuit, they were stunned. My dad's face went through about 12 different expressions before settling on something between rage and panic. My mum just kept repeating, "But you're 17, you're 17." The real problem quickly became clear. We couldn't afford a proper legal defense. Mr. Anderson was a partner at the biggest law firm in our county. They had resources, connections, and a reputation for scorched earth litigation tactics. My parents both worked at the local hospital, mom as a nurse, dad in billing. Their combined income was comfortable, but not fight a protracted legal battle against a vindictive attorney. Comfortable. That's when everything unraveled. My senior year, which was supposed to be about college applications and making memories, became consumed by legal stress. My grades started slipping. I had panic attacks before tests. Friends stopped inviting me places because I was too intense now. Even Zoe started pulling away, caught between loyalty to me and the complicated feelings about her dad that her therapist was helping her process. My parents tried to negotiate directly with Mr. Anderson, but he was out for blood. He wanted me to sign a public apology, admitting I'd made everything up out of jealousy and pay damages that would have bankrupted my family. When we refused, he pushed for an expedited trial date. The turning point came when the local newspaper ran a story about the case. Local attorney sues high school student over failed marriage wasn't exactly the headline Mr. Anderson had hoped for. The article mentioned his alleged affair with a teacher, his attempt to extract $250,000 from a minor, and quoted several legal experts questioning the validity of the case. The next day, Professor Harrington from the State University's law school contacted my parents, offering to represent me pro bono. This case is a textbook example of legal intimidation tactics, she told us, and I teach the textbook. With Professor Harrington leading my defense, things changed rapidly. She filed a motion to dismiss, arguing that intentional interference with marital relations typically applied to third parties who lured someone away from their spouse, not minors who documented existing affairs. She also pointed out that truth is an absolute defense against such claims. The final nail in Mr. Anderson's legal coffin came from an unexpected source, Ms. Peterson. Facing a disciplinary hearing at school after the newspaper article, she provided evidence that Mr. Anderson had pursued her, not vice versa, including dozens of emails where he'd initiated their relationship. She also confirmed that I'd never been involved beyond taking a few photographs from public locations, all at Zoe's request. When we appeared in court for the hearing on the motion to dismiss, the judge didn't even try to hide his contempt for Mr. Anderson. He threw out the case, saying, "The court will not be used as an instrument of intimidation against minors, especially when the plaintiff's own actions are the true cause of his marital discord." Mr. Anderson's reputation was destroyed. He left the law firm within months. Ms. Peterson resigned and moved to another state, and my college application season, a complete disaster with missed deadlines and half-finished essays written between legal consultations. But sometimes the universe has a way of balancing things out. 6 universities ended up offering me admission, including one with a full scholarship, that specifically mentioned my demonstrated integrity under extraordinary pressure in the acceptance letter. Apparently, the admissions committee had read about my case and been impressed by how I handled it. Zoe and I gradually rebuilt our friendship, though it's different now. Some experiences change you permanently. Her parents' divorce finalized last month, and she's starting to heal. We're heading to different colleges in the fall, but we've promised to visit each other regularly. I've learned that doing the right thing isn't always easy or safe. Sometimes it costs you relationships, opportunities, peace of mind. But I've also learned that I'm stronger than I thought, that some adults are less mature than teenagers, and that the legal system, for all its flaws, sometimes actually works the way it's supposed to. Having someone manipulate your professional life is devastating at any age. But imagine discovering the person systematically destroying your career is someone from your past. Landing my dream job at Luminary Tech felt like the universe finally cutting me a break after a rough year. I'd been grinding through a toxic work environment at my previous company, surviving a messy breakup with my girlfriend Melissa, and living on ramen to make rent in an overpriced studio apartment. When I got the offer for a senior developer position with an actual livable salary, I felt like I could finally breathe again. The hiring process had been intense but standard. 3 rounds of interviews, a technical assessment, and a final conversation with the CTO. I was set to start in 2 weeks, giving me just enough time to wrap things up at my old job without burning bridges. That's when I received my first email from Sarah Chen, my soon-to-be direct supervisor. Hi Jason, so excited to have you joining the team. I'm currently working remotely from our Seattle office until next month, but I wanted to reach out and start getting you oriented before your official start date. Could we set up a quick call tomorrow? The email seemed normal enough, and I appreciated her proactive approach. We scheduled a call, but when the time came, she messaged that she was having technical difficulties with her camera and microphone. Instead, we ended up chatting through the company's messaging platform. She was friendly, enthusiastic about my background, and seemed genuinely interested in helping me hit the ground running. Over the next few days, her requests started getting strange. First, she asked me to write up a detailed critique of my current employer's development practices, so we don't repeat their mistakes. When I mentioned feeling uncomfortable criticizing them in writing, she assured me it was standard procedure and would be kept confidential. It shows analytical thinking and commitment to improvement, she wrote. Plus, I need to share your assessment with the executive team to demonstrate why you're such a valuable hire. Put that way, it seemed reasonable enough. I wrote up a balanced but honest assessment, careful not to include any proprietary information, but definitely highlighting the issues that had made me want to leave. Next, she asked for examples of code I'd written at my current job to get a sense of your style. Again, I expressed hesitation about sharing intellectual property, but she assured me this was routine. Just sanitize any sensitive information, she suggested. We just need to see structure and approach. Then came the Slack channels. Sarah created several private channels for us, including one called In Real Talk, where she encouraged me to share my unfiltered opinions on various tech industry issues. Some of the prompts were oddly political or controversial. What do you think about the debate over political censorship in app stores? She asked one day. Don't hold back. We value authentic voices here. I found myself crafting careful responses, trying to sound thoughtful without being too polarizing. Something felt off, but I chalked it up to pre-job anxiety and the desire to impress my new boss. That's when things went from strange to downright bizarre. Sarah sent me onboarding paperwork, requesting my social security number, a copy of my driver's license, and banking details for direct deposit. The forms looked legitimate with the company logo, but the email came from a Gmail account rather than the company domain. Our HR system is being migrated, she explained when I questioned it. We're using secure temporary channels for now. A tiny alarm bell rang in my head, but I ignored it. After all, She knew details about my interview process and the company that would be hard to fake. I filled out the forms but decided to hold off on sending the most sensitive information until my actual start date. My first day finally arrived. I walked into Luminary Tech's downtown office brimming with excitement and a touch of nervousness. The receptionist welcomed me and called someone from HR to get me set up. Everything seemed normal until the HR director mentioned that my team lead, Sarah, was excited to meet me in person for the first time. Wait, I said, confused. Sarah's here. I thought she was in Seattle until next month. The HR director looked equally confused. Sarah's never been to Seattle. Her office is just down the hall. My stomach dropped as I was led to meet a woman I'd supposedly been communicating with for 2 weeks. A woman who had no idea who I was beyond a name on a hiring report. The real Sarah Chen was nothing like the persona I'd been chatting with. She seemed shocked by my references to our conversations and had never created any Slack channels or requested any documents from me. Within an hour, I was sitting in a conference room with Sarah, the HR director, and the company's security officer. I showed them the emails, messages, and documents I'd received and sent. Their faces grew increasingly grim as they realized what had happened. This is a sophisticated social engineering attack, the security officer finally said. Someone has been impersonating both you and Sarah. 2 days later, I was fired. The official reason, violating company confidentiality policies and ethics guidelines by sharing proprietary information from my previous employer and making inappropriate political statements in company communications. Despite my explanations, the damage was done. The startup couldn't risk keeping someone who'd already created potential legal liability before even officially starting. I left the building in a daze, my dream job evaporating like morning mist. Who would do this? Why target me specifically? I wasn't working with sensitive information or in a high-stakes industry. I was just a regular developer trying to level up my career. The answer came 3 days later when I received a text from an unknown number. How does it feel to lose everything you care about? Now you know how I felt. M. Melissa, my ex-girlfriend. The woman who'd sworn she was totally fine with our breakup 6 months earlier. The revelation hit me like a truck. Melissa worked in digital marketing. She knew how to create convincing online personas. She had access to my laptop several times during our relationship. And most importantly, she knew how much this job meant to me because I'd posted about it on LinkedIn with the company tagged. I took everything to the police, who initially seemed skeptical about pursuing what they viewed as a personal dispute. But when they realized the potential financial damages and identity theft aspects, they opened a proper investigation. What they uncovered was staggering. Melissa had created not just fake email accounts for Sarah, but elaborate social media profiles that mirrored the real Sarah's professional history. She had used information from my laptop to access my previous employer's internal systems. She had even impersonated me in communications with Luminary Tech's executives, sending inflammatory messages that I never wrote. The digital paper trail was damning. Melissa was arrested and charged with identity theft, corporate espionage, and fraud. According to the detective assigned to my case, she'd confessed almost immediately, claiming she wanted to teach me a lesson about discarding people. Imagine being so consumed by revenge that you'd risk criminal charges just to derail someone's career. That's not even regular toxicity. That's weapons-grade emotional plutonium. Luminary Tech, faced with the evidence that I'd been the victim of an elaborate setup, offered to reinstate me with compensation for lost wages. After much consideration, I accepted. Starting over at a new company would mean explaining this bizarre situation all over again during interviews, and I wasn't sure who would believe me. Rebuilding my professional reputation took months. Colleagues were understandably wary at first, having heard rumors about my inappropriate behavior before the truth came out. The documents I'd shared from my previous employer created tension that required legal mediation to resolve. I've since implemented almost paranoid privacy measures across all my accounts. Two-factor authentication everywhere, different passwords for every service, limited information on social media. I warn new acquaintances about sharing job news or travel plans online. Some call me overly cautious. I call it learning from experience. The whole ordeal taught me that some industries are breeding grounds for this type of targeted sabotage. In competitive fields where personal relationships and professional networks overlap, the potential for damage is enormous. It also taught me that we're all more vulnerable than we think to someone who has both motivation and inside knowledge. Trust within families should be sacred, but some relatives will go to disturbing lengths to prove their suspicions. I've had a shellfish allergy since I was 8 years old. Not the immediately stab yourself with an EpiPen kind, but the face swells up like a balloon, hives cover my body, and breathing gets increasingly difficult over an hour or two kind. Still serious, still documented by multiple doctors, and still something I've had to be careful about my entire life. When I first started dating my husband Mark, I told him about my allergy early on. He was great about it, checking ingredients when we went out to eat, making sure there was no cross-contamination when he cooked for me. All the considerate things you'd hope for from a partner. I thought his family would be just as understanding. Enter Barbara, my mother-in-law. From our very first meeting, she seemed skeptical about my allergy. She'd make these little comments, not quite direct enough to call her out on, but pointed enough that her meaning was clear. Oh, another young person with food allergies. They're so common these days, aren't they? In my day, we just ate what was put in front of us. Or, my personal favorite, I read an article that said most food allergies are actually just in people's heads. The mind is so powerful. I tried to be patient. I smiled through her passive-aggressive comments at family dinners, gently reminded her when she'd forget about my allergy while planning menus, and always thanked her profusely when she made any accommodation. Kill 'em with kindness, right? For the first 2 years of our marriage, I managed to avoid any reactions while at Barbara's house. I'd discreetly check ingredients, ask about preparation methods, and sometimes eat before we visited if I was particularly concerned about what she might serve. Mark would run interference when needed, though he admittedly didn't always catch his mother's more subtle digs. Then came the infamous Easter dinner incident. Barbara had prepared an elaborate spread, and when I arrived, she made a point of telling me she'd made everything shellfish-free. I know how important your sensitivity is to you, she said with that smile that never quite reached her eyes. I felt a pang of gratitude. Maybe she was finally accepting that my allergy was real. The food looked amazing. A beautiful ham, scalloped potatoes, asparagus, fresh rolls, and several side dishes I didn't recognize, but looked delicious. About halfway through the meal, I noticed my lips starting to tingle. Then my tongue began to feel thick. Anyone with food allergies knows that feeling of dawning horror, that moment when you realize something is very, very wrong. I excused myself to check my face in the bathroom mirror. Sure enough, hives were starting to form around my mouth. By the time I returned to the table, my voice was growing hoarse. Mark, I whispered, I think there's shellfish in something. We need to go. What followed was a panicked drive to the emergency room as my airways continued to constrict. By the time we arrived, my face was so swollen I could barely see, and I was struggling to breathe. The ER team immediately administered epinephrine, but my reaction was severe enough that I needed a second dose before the symptoms began to subside. As I lay in the hospital bed with an IV drip and oxygen, Mark was beside himself with worry and confusion. I don't understand, he kept saying. Mum promised everything was shellfish-free. Here's where the story takes a turn that still makes my blood boil when I think about it. While I was sleeping, Mark decided to call his mother to tell her what had happened. He wanted to figure out what might have contained shellfish so we could avoid it in the future. He used my phone since his was low on battery, and that's when he saw the text notifications from Barbara to her friend Carol. Adding shrimp paste to his portion will finally prove he's faking for attention. And earlier messages, tried a tiny bit of fish sauce last month. Nothing happened. Maybe needs more. Increased to crab extract at Christmas. Thought I saw some redness but could have been the wine. Easter plan, shrimp paste in the potatoes, just his serving. Enough to trigger a reaction if he's really allergic. Mark showed me these messages when I woke up, his hands literally shaking with rage. This woman, his mother, had been systematically poisoning me for months, gradually increasing the doses to test my allergy. The Easter dinner was just the culmination of her deranged experiment. The absolute psychopathy it takes to methodically poison someone over multiple family gatherings while smiling to their face. We're not talking about regular mother-in-law boundary issues anymore. This is straight-up criminal behavior wrapped in a cardigan and pearls. I've never seen Mark so angry. Without hesitation, he called the police from the hospital and reported his own mother for assault. The investigating officer was initially skeptical until Mark showed him the text messages. Barbara was arrested that night. When confronted, Barbara didn't even deny what she'd done. Her defense was somehow even more disturbing than the act itself. She claimed she was helping cure me through exposure therapy she'd researched online. According to her twisted logic, most allergies were psychological, and forcing someone to confront the allergen would help them overcome their attention-seeking behavior. The judge didn't buy it. Barbara was issued a restraining order and mandated to undergo psychiatric evaluation. She was eventually diagnosed with factitious disorder imposed on another, previously known as Munchausen by proxy, a condition where someone fabricates or induces illness in another person to gain attention or sympathy. Mark cut contact with his mother except for occasional supervised visits that I'm not part of. His father, to his credit, was horrified by what Barbara had done and has been supportive of our decision to maintain distance. Some of Mark's extended family, however, think we overreacted by involving the legal system. Apparently, attempted murder via allergic reaction is just something we should have handled within the family. These days, I bring my own food to any gathering I can't completely avoid with Barbara's side of the family. I've also become much more cautious about eating anything I haven't prepared myself. The physical symptoms of my allergic reaction faded within days, but the psychological impact has been lasting. How do you trust people around food when someone deliberately poisoned you? The silver lining, if there is one, is that this experience strengthened my marriage. Mark never once hesitated to stand up for me, even when it meant taking legal action against his own mother. He's shown me what it means to truly have someone in your corner, no matter what. Financial betrayals can tear families apart faster than almost anything else, as one Redditor discovered during what should have been a joyful holiday celebration. Winning the lottery is one of those fantasies everyone has. You know, daydreaming about telling your boss to shove it, buying your dream house, traveling the world. The standard lottery winner montage we all play in our heads. What nobody fantasizes about is how quickly money can turn your loved ones into strangers with their hands out. When I won $14 million in the Powerball last year, my first instinct was to tell everyone I knew. Thankfully, the financial advisor assigned by the Lottery Commission talked me out of that particular disaster before it happened. Keep it quiet, she advised. Set up proper legal protections first, get a trust established, figure out your long-term plan, then and only then decide who needs to know. It made sense. I'd read those horror stories about lottery winners who end up broke or worse within a few years. I didn't want to be a statistic, so I followed her advice, with one exception. I told my cousin Taylor. We'd been close since childhood and she was in her final year of law school. I figured she could help me research wealth management options, plus I desperately needed to tell someone before I exploded. Taylor was thrilled for me and immediately jumped into research mode, sending me articles about estate planning and tax strategies. She helped me find a reputable attorney who specialized in sudden wealth management. For about 2 months, we worked together to get everything set up properly. I planned to tell the rest of the family at Christmas, once all the legal protections were in place and I'd had time to think about how I wanted to help certain family members. Thanksgiving arrived and I was nervous but excited to see everyone, knowing I was sitting on this huge secret that would soon change all our lives. I'd already decided to establish education funds for all the nieces and nephews, help my parents retire early, and maybe help my sister with the down payment on a house. Reasonable, generous gifts that wouldn't destroy anyone's work ethic or create unhealthy dependencies. The dinner was going great until Taylor arrived almost 2 hours late. The moment she walked in, I knew something was wrong. Her eyes were glassy, her movements exaggerated. She was drunk, really drunk. I tried to pull her aside, but she was loud and evasive, making a beeline for the dining room where everyone was gathered. She clinked her glass with a fork, silencing the room of about 30 relatives spanning 3 generations. With an exaggerated bow, she announced, "Everyone should thank me for helping your millionaire family member hide their lottery winnings from you. $14 million, and they weren't going to tell any of you until Christmas." The room froze. Every eye turned to me. I felt my face burning as Taylor continued, "I've been helping them set everything up legally so they don't have to share with any of you. Isn't that hilarious? They've been rich this whole time we've been here, talking about Christmas budgets and Black Friday sales. You know those dreams where you're suddenly naked in public?" This felt worse. The silent shock lasted maybe 3 seconds before the room erupted into chaos. Questions flew from all directions. People who had barely spoken to me in years were suddenly my best friends. My Uncle Joe, who I see maybe once every 2 years, immediately mentioned his mortgage. My cousin's husband started talking about the business he'd always wanted to start. Even my 10-year-old nephew got in on the action, asking for a PlayStation 5. It was overwhelming, suffocating. I mumbled something about needing air and escaped to the backyard, where I called my attorney in a panic. By the time I returned inside, the damage was done. Taylor was sobbing in the kitchen, my mum was trying to maintain order, and family members were already forming alliances and strategies. I'd like to say things improved after everyone had time to process the news, but that would be a lie. What followed was a masterclass in human greed and entitlement that would make Shakespeare's King Lear look like a mild family disagreement. Within a week, I received the first legal letter. My Aunt Kathy claimed I had verbally promised to pay off her mortgage during a family reunion 3 years ago, an event where lottery winnings weren't even remotely part of the conversation, because I hadn't won the lottery yet. The creative writing continued with my Uncle Robert, insisting we'd had a conversation about funding his retirement if I ever made it big. Then came my cousin Steve alleging I'd agreed to invest in his perpetually failing business ventures when I had the means. The desperation prize, though, went to my mother's cousin Diane, who I've met maybe 4 times in my life. She claimed we had an implied family contract because she once bought me an ice cream cone when I was 7. I wish I was making this up. The way some of these people spun complete fantasies about conversations we'd never had. It's like they all simultaneously developed the same strain of selective memory enhancement. The collective delusion would be almost impressive if it wasn't so sad. My lawyers shut down these claims one by one, but the damage to relationships was permanent. Taylor eventually apologized, admitting she'd expected a larger finder's fee for her help and had felt jealous and undervalued when I only offered to pay her standard hourly rate for her research. The alcohol on Thanksgiving had demolished her better judgment. "I thought I deserved more," she admitted tearfully. "I was the only one you trusted with the secret. I thought that meant I was special, that I'd get special treatment." I did establish that education fund for the family's children, money in a trust that can only be used for college or trade school tuition. Beyond that, I've maintained firm boundaries, No direct handouts, no business investments, no loan co-signing. The resentment this has created is palpable. 5 years later, half my family still doesn't speak to me. The other half only reaches out with thinly veiled requests disguised as casual catch-ups. Oh, just checking in. By the way, Junior's starting college next year, and we're a little short. Or have you ever thought about investing in organic alpaca farming? I have this amazing opportunity. The experience taught me that sudden wealth doesn't just change you, it changes everyone around you. It's like a spotlight that illuminates people's true characters in harsh, unflattering detail. Those who were kind remain kind. Those who were selfish become more so. The cousin who always remembered your birthday still remembers your birthday. The uncle who never bothered to learn your partner's name still doesn't know it, but now he knows exactly how much money you have. I'm not unhappy with my life now. The money has provided security and opportunities I never would have had otherwise, but I sometimes wonder what would have happened if Taylor had kept my secret, if I'd been able to approach the wealth revelation on my own terms. Maybe some relationships could have been preserved, or maybe the money would have exposed those fractures eventually anyway. Family deception can run deeper than you ever imagined, sometimes hiding truths that completely rewrite your understanding of your own life. I grew up believing my parents were dead. That sounds dramatic, but it was just my reality. According to the story I'd been told countless times, they died in a car accident when I was 13, and my brother Marcus was 15. A drunk driver crossed the center line on a rainy night, killing both my parents instantly. We moved in with our grandmother, who raised us with unwavering love and support. We kept a few family photos around, and once a year we'd visit the cemetery with flowers. It was sad, but it was our normal. For 15 years, that was my truth, until it wasn't. I met Ellie during my second year of teaching. She was the new art teacher, and we bonded over our mutual hatred of faculty meetings and shared love of 90s sitcoms. 2 years later, I proposed at the art museum where we had our first date. She said yes, and everything felt perfect. Our engagement party was at my grandmother's house, where I'd grown up after the accident. About 50 people crowded into the modest home. Ellie's large, boisterous family, my small circle of relatives and friends from work. My grandmother had gone all out with catering, decorations, and enough champagne to float a small boat. During the party, I made a toast thanking everyone for coming, especially my grandmother, who had stepped in as a parent when fate took mine away. I was mid-sentence about how excited I was to start a new chapter with Ellie when Marcus clinked his glass loudly. My brother had been acting strange for months, distant, moody, drinking more than usual. I'd assumed it was just stress from his recent divorce. He swayed slightly as he stood, clearly on his fifth or sixth drink of the night. "Congratulations, little brother," he slurred, raising his glass. "Truly. But before we celebrate any further, I think everyone should know that our parents aren't actually dead." The room went silent. I laughed nervously, assuming this was some bizarre, inappropriate joke. "They're alive and well in Arizona," he continued, "living their best lives with their new families, families that apparently worked out better than we did." My grandmother made a choke sound and sank into a nearby chair. Ellie's hand tightened around mine as she looked between me, Marcus, and our grandmother. Confusion etched on her face. "Marcus, what the hell?" I hissed, mortified by what I assumed was a drunken delusion. He pulled out his phone. "Wanna see? I have pictures. Mum works at a dental office now. Dad's a contractor. They live about 20 minutes apart, both remarried, both have other kids. Neither of them died in any car accident." He turned his phone around, showing a Facebook profile, and there she was, a middle-aged woman with my eyes and Marcus's smile, her arm around a teenage boy who looked eerily like childhood photos of me. The room started to spin. I felt Ellie guide me to a chair as my grandmother began to sob. This couldn't be happening. People don't just discover their dead parents are actually alive during their engagement party. That's not a thing that happens in real life. But as I would soon learn, truth is often stranger than fiction. After the guests awkwardly dispersed, my grandmother confirmed everything through tears. There was no car accident. My parents were heavy drug users who had chosen their addiction over their children. After multiple failed rehab attempts and brushes with Child Protective Services, they had simply left one day, saying they couldn't handle parenthood. My grandmother, heartbroken and furious, told us they had died, believing we would be better off thinking we were orphaned than abandoned. How could you lie about something so fundamental? I asked her, my voice barely a whisper. For 15 years. They were as good as dead, she replied, wiping her tears. I couldn't bear to see you boys waiting by the window, hoping they'd come back. This way, you could mourn and move on. Marcus had discovered the truth 3 months earlier when a distant cousin mentioned our mother in passing, not realizing we thought she was dead. He'd been secretly investigating ever since, finding their social media profiles, learning about their new lives. Why wait until now to tell me? I asked him later that night, after Ellie had gone home to give us space. Why ambush me at my engagement party? Because I've been carrying this alone for months, and I couldn't take it anymore, he admitted. And maybe because I'm a little jealous. You've always been better at being happy than I am. The revelation shattered my foundation. How could I promise Ellie, till death do us part, when I couldn't even trust the most fundamental facts of my own life? What else might not be true? The existential vertigo was overwhelming. Human psychology is a funny thing. We build our identities around certain cornerstone beliefs, and when one gets ripped away, the whole structure threatens to collapse. I wasn't just learning my parents were alive. I was learning I wasn't who I thought I was. I postponed the wedding indefinitely, much to the concern of Ellie's family. She stood by me, though, showing a patience I couldn't have anticipated. Take the time you need, she said. I'm not going anywhere. Marcus and I hired a private investigator to fill in the gaps of our parents' story. What we learned was both better and worse than I'd imagined. They had indeed abandoned us for drugs, but both had eventually gotten clean. Our mother had been sober for 12 years, our father for 9. They had new families who knew nothing about us. They had never tried to find us, having convinced themselves we were better off without them. A convenient narrative that absolved them of their guilt. 3 months after the engagement party, we arranged to meet them separately. Both meetings were awkward, painful affairs filled with tears, accusations, and flimsy justifications. They expressed remorse but also a strange detachment, as if we were distant relatives rather than their children. It became clear that while they regretted their actions, they weren't interested in being parents to us now. We were complications in their carefully reconstructed lives. It took another 6 months of therapy for me to process everything. Marcus still struggles with anger, particularly toward our grandmother for her deception. I've found more peace with it. While I don't condone her lie, I understand she was trying to protect us in the only way she knew how. She gave us stability when our parents wouldn't, and that counts for something. Ellie and I eventually did get married, not the big celebration we'd originally planned, but a small ceremony with just 20 guests. Marcus was my best man, and my grandmother walked me down the aisle. We maintained minimal contact with our biological parents, exchanging occasional emails, but nothing more intimate. Sometimes people ask if I wish I'd never learned the truth. It's complicated. The revelation caused tremendous pain, but it also forced me to confront my past and rebuild my identity on more solid ground. I'm no longer the person whose parents died tragically. I'm the person who survived abandonment and found family in chosen relationships rather than just biological ones. When intimate relationship secrets come to light during home renovations, the foundations of both your house and marriage can crumble simultaneously. Home renovations are supposed to improve your life, not destroy it. That's what my wife Jenna and I thought when we decided to finally update our dated 1990s kitchen. New countertops, custom cabinets, modern appliances, the works. The project strained our finances, but Jenna was insistent. "We deserve this," she kept saying. "It'll add value to the house." I agreed, not knowing the real reason behind her sudden enthusiasm for home improvement. We hired a local contractor named Mike after seeing his work in a neighbor's bathroom. He seemed professional, came with good references, and his quote, while not cheap, was reasonable. The renovation began smoothly. Mike and his crew were efficient, showing up on time and cleaning up after themselves daily. About 2 weeks into the project, they needed to remove a section of drywall to access some plumbing. That's when everything changed. Mike asked to speak with me privately after his crew left for the day. His demeanor had shifted from friendly professional to something unsettling. "Found something interesting in the wall," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Thought you should know about it." I assumed he meant mold or faulty wiring, the usual renovation surprises. Instead, he pulled out his phone and showed me a photo of a shoebox. "This was tucked behind the drywall in a hollow section," he explained. "Opened it thinking it might be, valuable or something. Didn't expect what was inside." He swiped to another photo. Hotel receipts, handwritten letters, and what appeared to be intimate photos of my wife with a man I recognized as her co-worker, David. My stomach dropped. "Where's the box now?" I managed to ask, my mouth suddenly dry. "Safe," Mike replied vaguely. "Thing is, this puts me in an awkward position. Your wife clearly wanted this hidden. Finding it could make things uncomfortable for everyone." I stared at him, slowly realizing where this conversation was heading. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm a businessman," he said with a shrug. "I've got kids in college, bills piling up. 15,000 would help me forget I ever saw this box." The audacity of this guy. My world was imploding from discovering my wife's infidelity, and this contractor was trying to monetize my personal tragedy. It's like finding someone bleeding on the sidewalk and offering to call an ambulance for a small convenience fee. I needed time to think, to process both my wife's betrayal and this blackmail attempt. I told Mike I'd need a few days to get the money together, and he agreed, keeping the shoebox as insurance. That night, I barely slept. Jenna noticed something was wrong, but assumed it was stress about the renovation costs. The irony was suffocating, her concerned looks and reassuring touches coming from the same hands that had written love letters to another man. The next morning, I made 2 important calls. The first was to a lawyer friend who advised me on the legality of recording conversations in our state. Thankfully, one-party consent was sufficient. The second was to a private investigator. For the next week, I played along with both Mike and Jenna. I met with Mike several times to discuss the renovation, secretly recording him as he reiterated his demands and showed me more contents from the box. Meanwhile, the PI confirmed what I already knew. Jenna had been having an affair with David for nearly 2 years. Their regular Thursday team meetings were actually rendezvous at a hotel downtown. Then came the breaking point. The PI discovered something that made this betrayal even more twisted. Jenna had actually ended the affair 3 months ago, right before suddenly pushing for the kitchen renovation. Text messages the PI obtained showed her telling David she wanted to make things right with her husband. Apparently, her version of atonement was spending our savings on new countertops rather than actual honesty. There's something uniquely horrifying about realizing your spouse's guilty conscience manifested as Italian marble and custom cabinetry instead of a confession. Talk about misplaced priorities. Armed with evidence from both the PI and my recorded conversations with Mike, I executed my plan. First, I went to the police with the blackmail recordings. They took it seriously, especially since Mike had shown a pattern of finding compromising materials during other renovations. Apparently, our wall wasn't the first one where he discovered secrets. After Mike was charged, I confronted Jenna, not with the shoebox Mike had found, but with the PI's evidence. I wanted her to know I'd discovered the truth independently, not because of random chance. She broke down immediately, admitting everything. The affair, its end, and yes, the renovation as some twisted form of penance. I thought if I made our home better, it would somehow make up for what I did, she sobbed. I know it sounds crazy now. You chose granite countertops over honesty, I said flatly. That's not making things right. That's just interior decorating. We tried counseling, but some betrayals cut too deep. The trust was irrevocably broken. Every time she was late coming home, every text message she received, I found myself wondering if David was back in the picture, or if there was someone new. No amount of therapy could rebuild what had crumbled. During our divorce proceedings, Mike's contractor license was revoked. The police found evidence that he had pulled similar blackmail schemes with at least 2 other clients. Small consolation, but at least he wouldn't be exploiting anyone else's misfortune. The half-finished kitchen became a perfect metaphor for our marriage, torn apart, exposed, and impossible to restore to what it once was. I eventually finished the renovation myself after Jenna moved out, a painful but somehow cathartic process. The experience taught me that privacy violations can come from unexpected directions. I never would have imagined a contractor would be the one to expose my wife's infidelity, nor that he would try to profit from it. I also learned that guilt manifests in strange ways. Jenna's expensive renovation wasn't really for us. It was for her, an attempt to buy off her conscience without doing the hard work of honesty. Finding someone has betrayed your trust is painful, but discovering they've been systematically exploiting your identity to live a completely separate life is beyond comprehension. I first noticed something was wrong when I started receiving credit card statements for accounts I'd never opened. At first, I thought it was just standard identity theft, frustrating but fixable. I'm a cautious person by nature, always monitoring my credit score, paying bills on time, keeping meticulous financial records. So when my credit alert app pinged me about a 150-point drop, I immediately went into problem-solving mode. What I discovered instead was that my entire life was a carefully constructed lie. The investigation started simply enough. I called the credit card companies, filed fraud reports, and requested documentation for all the accounts opened in my name. The customer service rep at American Express actually laughed when I told him there must be a mistake. "Sir, you verified your identity, and I can see you personally applied for these cards at our branch in Henderson. We have your signature and driver's license on file." "That's impossible," I insisted. "I've never been to Henderson. I don't even know where Henderson is." "Henderson, Nevada," he replied, "about 20 miles from Las Vegas." I live in Michigan. I hadn't been to Nevada since a brief bachelor party weekend a decade ago. Yet somehow there were 3 credit cards, 2 personal loans, and a mortgage, all opened within the past 4 years, all in Henderson, Nevada, and all using my social security number and what appeared to be my signature. I took a day off work to compile everything. The total fraudulent debt was staggering, over $400,000, including a $320,000 mortgage on a house I'd never seen. I gathered all the evidence and filed a police report, expecting a long but straightforward process of clearing my name. Then Detective Wilson called with a question that changed everything. "Mr. Cooper, does your wife travel frequently for work?" The question seemed irrelevant. "Yes, she's in pharmaceutical sales. She's on the road about 2 weeks each month. Why?" There was a long pause. "We need you to come to the station. There's something you need to see." At the police station, Detective Wilson laid out a series of photographs on the table. The first was a driver's license for a Jennifer Cooper. The photo was my wife Jessica, but the name was wrong. "That's my wife," I said, confused. "But her name is Jessica, not Jennifer." The detective slid another photo across the table, a marriage certificate dated 6 years ago, with the names Jennifer Cooper and Matthew Daniels. I'd been married to Jessica for 8 years. This is impossible, I whispered. There must be some mistake. I'm afraid there's more, Detective Wilson said gently, pushing forward several more photos. My wife, or the woman I thought was my wife, standing in front of a house I'd never seen. The same woman at a playground with two small children, a family portrait with her, the children, and a man who was definitely not me. We believe your wife has been living a double life, the detective explained. She's married to both you and this man, Matthew Daniels. She's been using your social security number and identity to finance their lifestyle in Henderson. The mortgage on their house is in your name. Their car loans, credit cards, everything. It's all tied to you. The room seemed to tilt sideways. My wife's frequent business trips, her insistence on handling all our finances, her explanation that her parents were dead, that she had no siblings, no one who knew her before we met. It all suddenly made horrible sense. The level of planning and deception required to maintain two separate families, two identities, two entirely different lives. It's beyond what most people could even conceptualize attempting. This wasn't just a momentary lapse in judgment. This was sustained, calculated betrayal executed over years. That's when everything unraveled. Police investigations in both Michigan and Nevada revealed the full extent of her deception. Jessica, or Jennifer, had been living as a bigamist for 6 years, traveling between two households under the guise of a demanding sales job. In Michigan, she was Jessica Cooper, loving wife who traveled for pharmaceutical sales. In Nevada, she was Jennifer Daniels, devoted mother of two who reluctantly traveled for consulting work. She'd used my social security number and identity to finance the Nevada life, telling Matthew she couldn't use her own credit because of an abusive ex who was stalking her. He believed her completely, never questioning why all their financial documents bore my name instead of hers. Both households had mortgages under my social security number. Both had vehicles financed through my identity. Neither Matthew nor I had any idea the other existed. The confrontation, when it finally happened, was surreal. Jennifer offered no real explanation, no emotional breakdown, no desperate pleas. She was eerily calm, as if relieved the charade was finally over. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she said quietly. I met Matt when I was on a business trip. It was supposed to be a fling, but then I got pregnant. I couldn't bring myself to end either relationship, so I just kept both going. For 6 years? I asked incredulously. You maintained two entire lives for 6 years? She shrugged. I'm good at compartmentalizing. That understated response captures the breathtaking emotional disconnect required to maintain this kind of double life. I'm good at compartmentalizing belongs in everyday conversations about work-life balance, not explanations for bigamy and massive fraud. The legal aftermath was lengthy and complex. Jennifer was convicted of identity theft, fraud, and bigamy. She's currently serving 8 years in prison. I was left with destroyed credit and mountains of fraudulent debt. While I was eventually able to prove I wasn't responsible for the Nevada accounts, the process took nearly 3 years, countless lawyer hours, and emotional stamina I didn't know I possessed. Perhaps the strangest outcome of this whole ordeal is my unlikely friendship with Matthew Daniels. After the initial shock and mutual suspicion wore off, we realized we were the only two people who truly understood what the other was going through. We've maintained contact, providing emotional support through identical traumas. We even meet for a beer whenever I'm in Nevada dealing with ongoing legal issues, though we're both careful to check each other's IDs first, a dark joke that somehow helps us cope. I've rebuilt my life slowly, Intensive therapy has helped me trust again, though I'm naturally more cautious now. I've learned that sometimes even those closest to us can be complete strangers, that you can share a bed with someone for 8 years and not know their real name. The house in Michigan sold eventually, though at a significant loss. I used the money to restart in a new city with a new job. I date occasionally, but I'm in no rush to remarry. Some wounds take longer to heal than others. And there you have it, friends. Reddit stories of betrayal, deception, and the incredible resilience of the human spirit. If you've stayed with me through all these twists and turns, you're definitely part of our Reddit drama family now. Remember that while these stories might seem outlandish, they reflect real human experiences, the pain, the healing, and everything in between. Sweet dreams, everyone, and remember, sometimes the most unbelievable stories are hiding in plain sight, perhaps even in your own life. Stay vigilant, stay kind, and I'll see you in the next collection of Reddit's most jaw-dropping true stories.